Chapter 448. Amon's Possible Origins. Amon. Klein said the word in his mind. He had originally thought that the blasphemer, who appeared in the forsaken land of the god's city of silver, was a descendant of an ancient family like Amon. Through inheriting the legacy of his ancestors, step by step, he stepped into the demigod ranks. To his surprise, it was very possible that that particular person could very well have lived for more than 2,000 years, and was a member of the Amon family when it was at the peak of its strength. An old antique. Why would he, for no good reason, build a tomb for himself? Did he fake his death to get out of a situation? Or is there another reason, such as leaving traces, so as to have time fixed onto his body? He was able to live from the 4th epoch to the 5th epoch, all because he was siphoning the lives of others? I originally guessed that he's a sequence 3 or sequence 2. Based on what I've seen today, it's not impossible for him to be a sequence 1. After all, long periods of time would eventually bring about an intrinsic improvement. Klein switched back and forth between puzzlement and speculation. His thoughts were like boiling water gurgling nonstop. The Horimic doll tugged at his throat and accidentally pulled off a piece of skin, revealing the complicated mechanical structure within. His voice came out from that spot, and brought with it the impression of leaking air. Search the corpses on the ground, don't come any closer. Yes, Your Grace. Cancer and company heaved a clear sigh of relief. The corpses on the ground had long since produced their beyonder characteristics. Some of them had even combined with certain parts of the body to form a terrifying mystical item. In addition, the dead carried all sorts of items on them. The machinery hive mind sure has reaped quite a harvest this time. Together with the specter portrait frame and the human skin shadow characteristic, this completely makes up for the crazy expenses of the cleanup. A huge investment for a high return. Klein's eyes lingered on the ground for quite a while. He inhaled, tore his gaze away, and followed Horimic, who didn't carry a lantern, to the wall on the other side of the coffin. At this moment, the magic mirror, Erodes, brightened up the scene, allowing the things in front of him to be seen clearly. Klein saw that the wall across him had become mottled due to the rapid weathering just now. Many of the murals had been destroyed and could no longer be restored to their original states. The only one that was more complete and could barely be seen clearly was a colorful mural at the top of the wall, which took up a small half of the dome. It described a towering mountain range, and on the highest mountain peak, there was a huge cross that was taller than the mountain. The cross was covered in layers of radiance, making it seem unusually holy. In front of it, a tall and domineering figure could be seen vaguely. The mountain range was like a pet that lay prostrate at its feet. This figure was surrounded by 2-winged, 4-winged, and 6-winged angels. They were holding bugles, playing harps, or playing flutes, looking pious and sprightly. At the foot of the mountain range, 2 12-winged angels were humbly walking towards the mountaintop, each holding a baby in their arms. The baby on the left had curly black hair, and the baby on the right had pale blonde hair. One of their eyes was black, the other golden. Elsewhere in the mountain range, there was a vague depiction of a giant with chains at its legs, and a dragon that had its legs bound and never be able to land. Horimic first looked at the baby on the left, and his genial expression became increasingly serious. He said a word in a very low voice, Amon. Then he turned to look at the baby on the right, and after a few seconds of silence he said another name, Adam. Amon Adam. As Klein repeated the names, he felt that the fog that hung over the history of the 4th epoch and the 3rd epoch was growing thicker. He combined all the information he had learned and quickly made a guess. On the mountaintop, the figure in front of the glowing cross is surrounded by angels, with giants and dragons submitting to it. It's definitely a real god that's at sequence 0. Another being who likes to partially use the cross as a symbol is the true creator. It's said that Amon is the descendant of an ancient sun god, but the one at the top of the mountain doesn't seem like a pure sun god. Could it be that he is the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God that the City of Silver believes in? This is in accordance with the legends of the City of Silver, the awakening of the Creator who stripped the King of Giants and the Dragon of Imagination and other ancient gods of their authorities. The so-called ancient sun god is actually the Lord that created everything as spoken about in the City of Silver? He may be in charge of the domains such as sun and time. In addition, the authorities of the Giant King, Ormer, and the Dragon of Imagination, Inkwelt, has likely returned to him. This can no longer be completely contained within Sequence 0. So, the original Amon was the descendant of the City of Silver's Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, who inherited the beyonder characteristics of the time domain. This seems to slightly explain why he remained silent in the City of Silver's dungeon for decades. Apart from him, there's also another descendant of the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God, named Adam. What did Adam inherit in the beginning? Does he still have a descendant alive? And if so, where would he be? What's the relationship between the true creator and that person? Is it simply an imitation by using the creator's title and the symbol of the cross? Or is there some deeper connection between the two? Klein didn't let his doubts show too much. After all, the magic mirror, a Rhodes, could be sizing him up. Hormick stared at the mural for a while. Then he suddenly took a few steps forward and pressed his extended palms against the wall. Without a sound, the majestic mural disintegrated, turning into pieces of stone fragments that landed on the ground. Even the color quickly evaporated, disappearing without a trace. The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery is consciously concealing the history of the third and fourth epochs. Are the other churches the same? Klein frowned and followed the Hormick doll to the other side. After making a half circle, they discovered another thing. A stone door, which only had an outline, loomed in the corner. At this moment, the Hormick doll's joints were constantly creaking, but this didn't stop him from quickly approaching the stone door and reaching out with his right hand to attempt to push. Above the stone door, there was a sudden burst of aqueous light that condensed into a scene that looked so real that it seemed possible to directly touch it. Dark blue waves were surging forward, and there was a dense black mist that looked like liquid. A craggy mountain protruded from the mist, continuously flowing with viscous liquids. Behind this mountain, the black mist seemed endless with no end in sight. There was also no limit to its depth. The deeper one looked, the more placid it felt. It was as if once something fell in, it would fall forever. What is this place? Klein's expression didn't change as he muttered inwardly. Hormick retracted his palms and watched as the scene gradually faded until it disappeared. He leaned his head back and sighed to himself while feeling perplexed. The abyss? That's the source of all corruption. It's said that it's an abyss that can even corrupt a true god? Klein was amazed, but as a former clown, he regulated his expression and limbs to appear unperturbed. He immediately thought of something. Roselle, who was exploring the fog sea, had once deviated from his path, leaving behind a puzzling sentence. I saw the abyss. As Klein pondered about the layers of waves that were surging towards the black fog, he made a conjecture. There's an entrance to the abyss somewhere in the fog sea? Immediately after, he looked towards the stone door. He suspected that Amon, who lurked around the City of Silver, had employed a certain ritual. After finishing the tomb, he didn't depart from it normally. Instead, he used a special tunnel to head for the abyss. Thus, in the eyes of most people, he was already dead. As for whether the City of Silver, or the forsaken land of the gods, was located somewhere in the abyss, Klein couldn't be sure. After all, the history of this tomb was at least 1,500 years old, so Amon had plenty of time to use the abyss to go somewhere else. Would he still occasionally come back to siphon off time? If he finds out that someone has dug up his grave, the expression on his face would definitely be very marvelous. Klein rejoiced for a baffling reason. At this moment, the Hormick doll held his left hand in his right palm and abruptly twisted it. With a creaking sound, his left hand was bent at the wrist, but there were no bones that pierced out of his skin, spewing out flesh and blood. There was a heavy black metal tube inlaid in his left wrist. His entire left arm was a small-caliber mystical cannon. To hide a mole of advanced technology, he truly is worthy of being from the machinery hive mind. However, the requirements and costs for such a thing are too high. Clearly, it could only be provided to specific personnel, and not for military troops. Klein felt that today was an eye-opener for him. An opportunity to see another development path in the mysterious world. The only problem is that beyonder characteristics are conserved, artisans are limited, so many things cannot be mass-produced. The Hormigdal put his left wrist against the stone door. Inside his body, the sound of gears grinding against each other, as they revolved, emitted an intense spirituality radiance. A ray of light that was as bright as day appeared and disappeared. The stone door suddenly turned into pure powder, as if it had never existed. He destroyed the door? If Blasphemer Amon encounters an emergency situation and attempts to return here, only to find the door gone, that would be fun. Klein almost laughed when he imagined that scene. This was the end of the Amon family's tomb exploration. The scene surrounding Klein quickly shrank and became the background. An illusory, ancient, and bizarre silver mirror appeared in midair. The black, "I like gemstones" on the mirror flickered. White words were quickly outlined in the mirror. "Your loyal servant, Erodes, has finished reporting and is ready to serve you at any time again." Klein was a bit wary and unaccustomed towards the fellow who appeared too enthusiastic. He nodded and said, "Well done, you may leave first." Yes, the mighty existence above the spirit world. As soon as Rhodes produced that line of words, the scene around him shattered into pieces. After confirming that its power had left his dream, Klein thoughtfully said to himself, "The mighty existence above the spirit world? It really has vaguely sensed the gray fog. Does this magic mirror with a wicked sense of humor really wish to rely on me? Or does it have some other purpose? I have to watch carefully. Otherwise, with it at the machinery hive mind, I don't want to be repeatedly blasted with cannon fire." Rounding up his thoughts, Klein began looking forward to the next day. After the machinery hive mind tidied up their spoils, they were likely to get him to choose an item. Chapter 449. Better choice in Empress Burrow, inside the opulent villa of Earl Hall. The cold air was kept out by the windows and walls. The building's interior was warm as though it were spring, and the fireplace was elegant. Audrey Hall was having her measurements taken by the fashion designer, Mrs. Guinea, so that she could create a costume for Audrey for the New Year banquet in consideration of her recent physical and emotional state. At this moment her personal maid Annie came close to her ear and whispered, "Lady Escalante is here." Such a fast response. Audrey was delighted, but she didn't make an obvious show of it on her face. With a faint smile she said, "Please get her to wait in my art studio. For 5 minutes." "Art studio?" Annie asked in surprise. "Yes, I'd like to ask her to admire my recently completed oil painting. She says that content that is painted in a relaxed state easily allows one to express their true thoughts and emotions," Audrey explained unhurriedly. Annie suddenly felt enlightened. "Yes, Mississippi." Less than 5 minutes later, Audrey entered the studio and saw Escalante admiring the paintings on the walls. "That's Mr. Cenci's Inner Heart's Night, a masterpiece that allows one to feel peace." She smiled and introduced the painting to Escalante. "Cenci's Inner Heart's Night? One of the top 10 works of last year's top 100-century-old paintings that the Tussock Times voted for." Escalante was obviously the kind of person who often read newspapers, and as a beyonder of the spectator pathway, she had a good memory. "Yes," Audrey replied simply, as though it was a trivial matter. "I actually have the honor of seeing the real deal." Escalante looked up at the painting again. She swallowed back the words, "This is worth at least a manor," unwilling to appear too Philistine. Audrey didn't continue introducing the other paintings. She found a reason to send Annie away, and motioned to Susie to stand guard outside the door. Susie read her hint without any hindrance, wagged her tail and scampered out. Escalante closed the door and went back to the easel's side. Before Audrey could ask, she took the initiative and said, "We have both the human skin shadows characteristic and the Windbless potion formula. However, there is no need for us to sell it unless the other party is able to provide an irresistible offer. The willingness to negotiate means there's hope." Audrey's green eyes darted slightly as she asked with a chuckle, "What do you wish to receive in exchange?" Escalante stroked her hair and gave her pre-prepared answer. £2,500 for the human skin shadow characteristic, and £3,000 for the Windbless potion formula. Quite a huge premium. Although Audrey didn't find them expensive, she lamented the fact that the psychology alchemist's premium had exceeded 50%. According to the description given by the hanged man, under normal circumstances, the formula for sequence 6 would have cost less than £2,000, but the closer it was to a high sequence, the fewer potion formulas there were to circulate, making it very difficult to buy them. There was no normal situation, and what was even more important was that even if one chanced upon a sale, it was very difficult to ascertain their authenticity. At that moment, Escalante added, "If the other party can barter with mystical items, all that's needed is for them to be of roughly the same value. That is to say, you want mystical items more, and can accept a price reduction for them." The Psychology Alchemists is one of the youngest secret organizations. They clearly haven't accumulated enough in this area compared to the others. Audrey pursed her lips and said, "I'll inform them, but I can't guarantee that they'll accept it." She wasn't the least bit worried that the Psychology Alchemists would notice that she hadn't been involved in any Beyonder gathering recently. After all, her schedule was rather tight. Afternoon tea, music lessons, dinners, dances, equestrian training, language lessons, dancing lessons, and so on. There were too many opportunities for her to interact with different people. In that case, perhaps a particular dinner was a cover for Beyonder gatherings, or perhaps the music teacher was a senior Beyonder, and it was almost impossible for the Psychology Alchemists, who hid in the shadows, to investigate it when they couldn't act openly. Having said this, Audrey curiously asked, "Ms. Escalante, I thought you wouldn't sell the Windbless potion formula since it's already at sequence 6. Haha, if there's a chance, it might be more useful to spread this information out," Escalante answered vaguely. In her mind, although Miss Audrey was a new member, who had a high level of importance attached to her by the organization, she was still a new member after all. There were many things she couldn't know about. Why? Audrey suppressed her doubts and smiled sweetly. She asked innocently, "Ms. Escalante, if this deal succeeds, can you count it as my contribution?" Escalante broke into a laugh. "Yes." Klein busied all morning until he returned to Minsk Street. He filled his stomach and prepared to rest. Only then did he have the time and opportunity to listen to prayers above the gray fog. Someone on Miss Justice's side has the human skin shadow characteristic? Seriously? Either it doesn't come, or it comes in pairs. As a secret organization, the Psychology Alchemists is quite qualified in the field of resources. Klein was suddenly left in the throes of happiness from having a choice. Even if he counted the £500 which the hanged man still hadn't paid him, he only had £1,335 in cash. This didn't prevent him from seriously considering the request for a deal with the Psychology Alchemists. After thinking for a dozen seconds or so, he passed Justice's words to the hanged man to see what choice the latter would make. £3,000. Alger Wilson, who was still in Rorstad Archipelago's capital, the city of generosity, felt as if someone had struck him hard. After he became captain of the Blue Avenger, he sometimes played the role of a pirate and sometimes a law enforcer, secretly exterminating several groups of pirates. But even so, the total value of his spoils of war didn't exceed £2,000, and a portion of it had to be distributed to the sailors under him. Of course, this didn't include the ships and cannons, which were captured, as they had to be handed over to the Church of the Lord of Storms. This made Alger often sigh that most pirates weren't rich, that they were used to squandering on having opulent lives. Liquor, barbecue, whores, marijuana, and gambling had drained the pirates of their money. "Unless I meet a pirate crew with Beyonders, it would be very difficult to get rich so suddenly." Alger paced a few steps, then he made up his mind. He took out a gold mask from his undergarment pocket. The mask had rough facial features, and the way they were formed had the characteristics of a primitive human being from an ancient forest. Alger sat down, humbly recited the honorific name of the fool, and said, "I'm willing to use this mystical item to barter for the Windbless potion formula. As long as the user wears this mask, they will become extremely calm and emotionless. At the same time, they will also obtain an extremely strong regenerative ability, exaggerated speed, and outstanding strength. as well as grasp a certain amount of black magic and primitive curse techniques. Its weakness is that as the number of times it's used increases, the wearer will become more and more unlike a human being. They will turn colder and colder, eventually treating themselves as a god. Sitting in his seat as the fool, Klein looked at the 500-pound note in front of him. The 5 strands of dark blue hair, as thick as a tiny snake, and the simple golden mask. He tapped the edge of the long table with his finger, thinking carefully about what mystical items he could use for a trade. The all-black eye? Certainly not. This is the main ingredient of a sequence 5 Nimblewright master. It's just short of having Little Sun to obtain the method to remove the mental corruption. Dark Emperor card? This card, which cannot see the light of day, has a value countless times higher than that of a human skin shadow's characteristic. Mr. Azek's copper whistle? At the moment, its only function is the summoning of a messenger, and it's an important tool for communication. I can't sell it. The copper whistle of the numinous episcopate member, who left behind white feathers? Similarly, it can only summon a messenger, but the target on the other side of the messenger seems to be very dangerous. Sun brooch. This is something I want to use for myself. It effectively makes up for my weaknesses. Master key? It involves Mr. Door, and has too many hidden secrets. In addition, just from the value of its effects, it pales in comparison to the human skin shadow's characteristic. Biological poison bottle? This is very compatible with my spirit body state. If I use it well, I can even fight a group of Beyonders. Demon hunting bullets, purifying bullets, exorcism bullets? They are not mystical items, and are considered consumable Beyonder weapons. They are of very low value. The Book of Secrets? This isn't a mystical item either. The psychology alchemists likely do not lack such knowledge. At present, only the Beyonder characteristic of an interrogator can be sold. However, the psychology alchemists wants mystical items. Furthermore, the trading venue is in Backlund, so it would easily expose information pertaining to Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. Klein took this opportunity to sort out what he had, and finally came up with a perfect plan. He first took the form of Mr. World, manipulating him to take up a praying posture, and then he responded with a hoarse voice. I accept the price of 2,500 pounds, but give me 2 days to raise the money. Immediately following that, Klein threw the reply scenes of the Hanged Man and the world to the Crimson Star, which symbolized Miss Justice. After receiving affirmation from Miss Justice, Klein waited patiently all afternoon at Minsk Street. It was late afternoon when the Machinery Hivemind member, Carlson, rang his doorbell. Klein didn't ask anything further. He followed the man to the Lever Cathedral near the West Balham Dock and entered a 3-story building next to the cathedral. The signboard wrote, Backlund Institute for Mechanical Research. How academic! Klein suddenly thought of the Blackthorn Security Company and cracked the corner of his lips into a smile. Under Carlson's guidance, he passed through some strange devices and found himself in a windowless room. On the long table in the room, there were many items emitting strong spirituality, including the human skin shadow characteristic and the specter portrait frame, which was covered in black cloth. However, there were no characteristics left behind by the dead Beyonders. Obviously, the higher-ups of the Machinery Hivemind don't want me to know about the law of indestructibility and conservation. Klein wasn't the least bit surprised. You can choose one. The hatless Acancer pointed at the long table. Klein scrutinized the items several times before sighing. There's nothing I want. If I were to convert it into gold, how much would I get? He had already made up his mind that he wouldn't obtain the human skin shadow's characteristic from the Machinery Hivemind. Although this could be explained as the need to create some mystical item, or to try out a unique ritualistic magic, there was still a chance of exposing his own sequence. In a situation where there was a better choice, Klein didn't want to take the risk. Thus, he intended to take only money. Not only would this help him gather the 2,500 pounds that the psychology alchemists quoted, but he could also effectively dispel the Machinery Hivemind's wariness towards him. Acancer was visibly relieved. He smoothed his hair and answered with a smile. 1,500 pounds. However, we encourage you to choose money, so a total of £2,000. Klein immediately revealed a sincere smile. All right. Chapter 450. Distribution of money with the help of a bestowment ritual. Klein handed £2,500 in cash, and the gold mask provided by the hanged man to Miss Justice. And he used the image of the world to urge her to close the deal as soon as possible. I've spent almost £5,000 in the past 2 weeks. If I didn't leave Tianjin, this amount of money is enough for me to maintain a lifestyle, just like my landlady's family. A doll ruins one's life. Consuming potions bankrupts you for 3 generations. Klein looked at the vast fog and the ancient palace, which had returned to silence. He was a little upset, as though he had lost something important. He was quiet for a few seconds before returning to the real world. He picked up the remaining £830 on his desk, and he counted out 6 £5 notes. Then, Klein put the £30 of cash in his now deflated wallet and stuffed it solemnly into the inside pocket of his clothes. He divided the other £800 into 2 stacks, placing 1 stack in each of his side pockets. After that, Klein opened the drawer and took out 2 of the 5 deep-sea naga hair strands that he had brought back to the real world. He wrapped them in layers after layers of paper and carefully put them into his pocket. When he was done, he took his hat and cane, and he headed for the street corner under the glow of the street lamps at night. He got on a carriage and headed for the Bravehearts bar in the Backlund Bridge area. In the heated and noisy environment, Klein insisted on finishing his glass of Southville beer before he slowly made his way out of the bar and into a rental carriage through the thundering cheers for the boxers. Taking in the rumbling of the wheels, he intentionally closed his eyes. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the window being lightly tapped. Klein's facial muscles twitched slightly as he opened his eyes and looked in front of him. He saw the pale and exquisite Miss Sharon sitting quietly across him. Without waiting for her to question him, Klein smiled and said, "I sold the information you gave me last time for a good price, the one about the Amon family tomb." Sharon looked at him silently. Leaning his cane to the side, Klein took out 2 stacks of cash and a small clump of paper from his pocket. £800 plus 2 strands of deep-sea naga hair. For a total of about £1,000. That's what you deserve. Klein took a silent breath and smiled as he handed over the cash and paper clump. Sharon glanced at him and reached out her hand to take both items. She lowered her head, looked at the items in her hand, and asked in an ethereal voice, "How much did you sell it for?" £2,000, so we split it equally. Klein chuckled. If the machinery hive mind had only paid me £1,500 according to the original plan, then I'll have to first owe you a portion of it, he thought gladly. With a flip of Sharon's bloodless hand, the cash and the paper clump disappeared without a trace. She raised her head and tersely acknowledged before asking succinctly, "What's in the tomb?" "I don't know, I didn't go." Klein didn't disclose the help he had received from the magic mirror, a Rhodes. For an instant, he felt that if he described the experience in detail, Miss Sharon would have listened attentively with one hand on her cheek, as she had done before. This wraith lady seems to have a hobby of watching situational scenes and dramas, or listening to all kinds of rumors, Klein summed up. Sharon's expression didn't change. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Someone is digging a tunnel to the underground ruin." Huh? Klein wasn't able to react for a moment to what Sharon was talking about. However, he soon understood which underground ruin Sharon was referring to. There was only one underground ruin the two of them knew of, and that was the 4th epic Tudor dynasty ruin. Someone is digging their way into the underground structure? Klein pondered for a few seconds. Then he suddenly came to a realization. Is it that baronet? He had already forgotten the name of the hidden Tudor dynasty descendant, other than knowing that he had an aristocratic title of a baronet, and that he lived on Civilau Street, where the Backlund police station was located. Yes. Sharon gave him a positive answer. What is he looking for? Doesn't he know that there's an evil spirit inside? Doesn't he know that all the Beyonders from his family died in there? Klein asked himself a few questions. Sharon sat up straight and replied seriously, "I don't know if he knows or not." "How much longer will he take to dig through?" Klein asked in deliberation. Another 2 to 3 months for the time being, he's doing it on his own. Sharon provided her own judgment. Phew. Klein let out a small sigh. There's no need to rush. When I'm ready, then we can go visit him together. At this point he explained with a smile. As you know, I like to make sufficient preparations in advance. I won't get involved in anything until I advance to faceless. He warned himself inwardly. All right. Sharon didn't ask him what he was going to do, but her figure faded quickly, and she disappeared from the carriage. Klein leaned back against the wall, feeling relaxed. The ingredients for the faceless potion has been reserved, and I'm just waiting for the delivery. My debts have all been paid off, so there's nothing to worry about. His mood was like a fizzy wine that had settled. Occasionally, there would be a little bit of joy that would silently surge upwards. The only problem is, Klein touched his left breast, where there was a shriveled wallet. He sighed and said to himself silently, only 30 pounds in cash, 5 gold coins, and some change. Thursday afternoon. Audrey Hall was waiting in the study for the arrival of Miss Escalante. After receiving the hanged man's and the world's replies, she had immediately sent a servant to send a letter to Escalante. The content of the letter was very ordinary. Audrey hoped that the second psychology class this week would be brought forward to Thursday. In reality, Audrey had already made an agreement with Escalante. Once she expressed such an intention, it would mean that the other party had agreed to the conditions. Tick, tock. The wall clock on the wall moved briskly, and Escalante, with her waist-reaching long hair, entered the room with several teaching materials in hand. Audrey immediately gave Susie a look. The big golden retriever somewhat reluctantly leaped out, lay down in the nearby shadows, and observed the people coming and going. Escalante closed the study door, looked around slowly, then sat down across the small white round table and put down the teaching materials. Are they paying for it in cash, or with some kind of mystical item? This member of the psychology alchemists asked in a low voice. One directly gave 2,500 pounds, and one provided a mystical item. Audrey flippantly took out a white cardboard box from her medium-sized orange handbag. The outside of the box was covered with a wall of spirituality. After removing the wall of spirituality, she opened the lid of the box, revealing the simple golden mask. Then she recounted the flaws and effects of the mask. To be honest, she was very curious when she received the mystical item. She had wished to test its effects since it was her first time coming into contact with a mystical item. However, she finally resisted her urges, as she didn't wish to turn cold. It's basically the same value. Escalante tried it, and breathed a sigh of relief. After 2 seconds, she pulled out the thickest textbook and flipped to page 48. The middle part of the textbook had been hollowed out. There was an iron box about the size of a palm, and a rolled-up piece of parchment. Human skin shadow characteristic. Windbless potion formula. Escalante showed and introduced them to her. Audrey's gaze cast towards the characteristic, which resembled a diamond. The face inside left her head spinning. This has the ability to restrain a spectator's powers. Is this the sequence pathway of Mr. World? No wonder. Audrey looked away and studied the formula. Sequence 6, Wind Blessed. Main ingredients: 6 crystalline feathers of a blue shadow falcon, a pair of dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. Before Audrey could examine the supplementary ingredients, Escalante rolled up the parchment in time. After that, she set up the wall of spirituality around the metal box again, closed the textbook, and pushed the thick book towards Audrey. Audrey held the book, but she didn't hand over the gold mask and 2,500 pounds to Escalante in a timely manner. Seeing the look of puzzlement in Escalante's eyes, the prepared Audrey smiled and said, "The other party is worried that the characteristic doesn't match, and that the formula is fake. They hope to verify it first. And before the verification, the money and items will all be held under my custody. All of them believe in my trustworthiness, and I do not wish to lose this reputation. I understand their concerns." Escalante paused for a moment before saying, "We trust you too." Since the money and items were in the hands of one of her own members, she wasn't worried about being cheated despite feeling upheavals. Besides, Miss Audrey is rich and powerful. She can be trusted to be a guarantor, Escalante thought with relief. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein held a spirit pendulum in hand, divining the authenticity of the wind-blessed potion formula. He didn't wish to inadvertently lose the most experienced and powerful member of the Tarot Club, Mr. Hanged Man. When he opened his eyes and saw the topaz pendant turning clockwise, Klein heaved a sigh of relief and sent his thoughts to the crimson star that symbolized the Hanged Man. City of Generosity. Alger first saw the endless gray fog before hearing Mr. Fool's low but distant voice. Miss Justice has completed the deal. An illusory piece of parchment appeared in front of Alger. On it was the wind-blessed potion formula. With the potion going through Mr. Fool's hands, he had no qualms about the authenticity of the formula. He bowed his head respectfully and thanked him. When the illusion dissipated, he immediately found a pen and paper to jot down the potion formula. Then, he paced back and forth in excitement, muttering to himself, "Blue Shadow Falcon. That primitive island has it." After finishing the matter regarding the Hanged Man, Klein finally had the time to check his human skin shadow characteristic. After confirming its authenticity, he relaxed and leaned back in his chair, exhaling happily. Finally, after 3 seconds, Klein suddenly sat up, and he decided that there was no time to lose. Tonight, he would concoct the faceless potion. 1. Generations. This is a meme in Chinese, where the dull and consuming potions change depending on the joke. Chapter 451. Faceless 15 Minsk Street. In the dank, cold kitchen, Klein rummaged for his newly bought large iron pot, poured fresh water into it, and carefully scrubbed it several times. Then he dropped some matches into it and snapped his fingers. The scarlet flames soared, and under his control, they quickly burned the remaining water droplets dry, without harming the surface of the pot. This time, there were no ingredients such as pure water in the potion recipe, so Klein was even more careful than the previous 2 times. He wanted to ensure that everything was in good measure to prevent any problems. Although he was able to divine whether the concoction would be successful or not, at least to not endanger his life, such a result could still involve his potion being ineffective. Attempting to extract the beyonder characteristics from the concoction would be relatively difficult. Just like the removal of the mental corruption of a rampager, he would need the corresponding technique, methods, or rituals, and Klein wouldn't be able to gather a second round of ingredients within a short period of time either. After finishing his preparations, Klein took a deep breath as he looked at the neatly arranged boxes. Finally, he recalled the potion recipe. Faceless. Main ingredients: mutated pituitary gland of a thousand-faced hunter, characteristic of a human skin shadow. Supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of a thousand-faced hunter's blood, 5 drops of black jimsonweed juice, 10 grams of dragon toothgrass powder, 3 strands of hair from a deep-sea naga. He first picked up the cardboard box which came from Vampire Emlyn White. He opened the box and took out the glass bottle that contained 100 milliliters of a thousand-faced hunter's blood. Glancing at the scale, Klein unscrewed the lid and steadily poured the sticky liquid into the pot with a stable wrist. The liquid changed its color, depending on the variation in the lighting. As it was a supplementary ingredient, he didn't pursue precision, and didn't use chemical experiment apparatus to separate and titrate the liquid. The thousand-faced hunter's blood was like thin honey that slowly filled the bottom of the pot. When Klein felt that it was about time, he stopped tilting it and allowed the liquid to flow back. There's still about 20 milliliters left. My spiritual intuition is quite accurate. Klein withdrew his gaze from the glass bottle and tightened the lid. This 20 milliliters of thousand-faced hunter's blood could still be used to make mystical items, beyonder weapons, extraordinary scrolls, or for drawing symbols or labels in some ritualistic magic. It was still very precious. After putting the glass bottle back into the cotton-filled box, Klein went down the list and added the black jimsonweed juice and the dragon toothgrass powder. He saw that the liquid in the iron pot started to bubble. Without pausing, he picked up 3 strands of dark blue hair that resembled tiny snakes with his black-gloved right hand, and he firmly placed them on the surface of the liquid. Sizzle! A faint mist rose from the iron pot, and the color of the liquid turned a deep blue. It already has such a strange effect, even without adding the main ingredients. As expected of a Sequence 6 potion, Klein reached out and grabbed the silver tin box which Vampire Emlyn White had thrown in as well. With a snapping sound, Klein opened the lid of the box, revealing a peach-like item inside. He didn't directly touch the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland. Instead, he placed the tin box over the top of the pot and overturned it. A yellow-brown object with the grooves and ridges of a brain fell in, crashing into the dark blue liquid. At this moment, no liquid droplets splashed up, and the pituitary gland that was constantly changing its shape silently melted. The colors of gray and yellowish-brown quickly merged with the dark blue, and the bubbling suddenly increased in size. At this point, Klein was a little nervous, but he controlled himself. He picked up the last box and overturned the huge diamond-like human skin shadow characteristic into the pot. All of a sudden, the mist converged, and even the glow of the gas lamps showed signs of being attracted and devoured as the room turned darker. When everything returned to normal, Klein finally saw what the final potion looked like. It was blackish green all over, and from time to time, it would produce a bubble the size of an eye, and as if it had a life of its own, it would produce a burping sound every few seconds. When the bubble reached the surface, it would immediately burst, and during this process, it would reflect light in a myriad of colors. The colors combined to form a picture of different faces, and the facial features seemed to be a random combination. Klein picked up the iron pot with one hand and poured the liquid inside into a glass bottle that he had prepared beforehand. Because of a potion's characteristics, not one bit was left in the pot. Using divination to confirm that the degree of harm was acceptable, which meant that the potion had been successfully concocted, Klein took the faceless potion bottle and walked steadily back to the second floor, entering the room with the curtains closed. After locking the door, he sat on the edge of the bed and, with the help of cogitation, calmed his slightly agitated and anxious mood. After sitting upright for more than 10 seconds, Klein twisted the cap off of the bottle, raised his right hand, and swiftly poured the entire potion into his mouth. A slightly tingling sensation swished in his mouth and esophagus, and finally, it fermented into a numbing sensation that made him lose his senses. Klein's psyche seemed to be extracted from his body as he had the feeling of being a bystander, and saw his mouth, nose, ears, and eyes melting. His entire face was melting. In just 2 or 3 seconds, his face and head had turned into what seemed like scorched white wax. His body was similarly abnormal. It was as if his bones and skin were being melted by blood. No, I can't allow such a situation to continue developing. Klein knew that if he didn't keep it under control, he could be on the verge of losing control at any moment. As a spectator, he tried his best to pull his thoughts back to his body, trying to visualize the layers of stacked spherical lights and maintain his state of cogitation. After a brief but repeated attempt, he finally felt his body once again. He tried his best to control every tiny part of his body, to hold on to his lower limit. As the melting and dissolving assaulted him again and again, Klein lost sense of how long he held on for. But when it finally came to an end, he regained the feeling that his body belonged to him. At that moment, he knew that he had finally broken through the threshold, and was now a Sequence 6. He was now a faceless. Klein didn't sweat, but he was mentally exhausted. He barely got to his feet, and walked to the full-length mirror, trying to observe what he looked like. Under the gas lamp's illumination, he took 2 sudden steps back, and caused the floor to reverberate. The scene in the mirror was extremely shocking. Klein saw that his face and exposed skin were covered with dense pale granules. It would make any normal creature who saw those go numb, and subconsciously resist. The more timid ones might even lose their mind. Despite knowing the acting method, and having completely digested the magician potion, my advancement to Sequence 6 was still rather difficult. I was only 2 to 3 steps away from losing control. I wonder how much of a risk those beyonders who relied on the accumulation of time, and barely qualified to consume the potion faced. The probability of failure definitely isn't low. It's no wonder Sequence 7 is relatively common among the members of the churches. and they will shoulder the responsibility of captain or bishop, while the number of people at sequence 6 begins to plummet. Klein closed his eyes and sat back in his chair. With the help of cogitation, he was able to restrain his overflowing spirituality and recover from his exhaustion. After about 10 minutes, the disgusting granules on his body had completely faded and merged into his flesh. Phew! Klein exhaled, walked back to the full-length mirror, and he looked at his full-bearded appearance. Suddenly, his facial hair began to squirm. His flesh and skin began to undergo a bizarre change like half-melted wax. Within a second or two, Klein had reverted to his original appearance: black hair, brown eyes, ordinary facial features, a clean face with a deep outline, and a somewhat thin body. He quietly gazed at his past self and stretched out his right hand to press it against his face. With a gentle touch, Klein's face changed again. His nose bridge was high, his lips were extremely thin, and there was a tinge of elegance in his handsome face. There was an unconcealable pride in his appearance. It was none other than vampire Emlyn White. A little too short. He laughed at himself. At this moment, the bones and ligaments in his body began to produce cracking and snapping sounds as his entire body suddenly soared up a little. He now looked identical to Emlyn White externally. I've noticed that I can accurately recall the exterior appearance and temperament of every person I know, and I can grasp their unique scent. Klein's pores squirmed, and his body changed accordingly. The smell of his body became different as a result of this. He looked into the full-length mirror again, letting his hairline slowly recede, and he changed the color of his eyes into a deep gray. Without a sound, Dunn Smith seemed to come alive again, and he was staring at the team member, who always came to him to report on unusual matters. Letting out a breath, Klein returned to his original form, but the corners of his mouth remained curled upwards. He thought for a moment, took a few steps back, and looked at the magazine, Ladies' Aesthetics, which he had bought to look at fashionable beauties, and he noted down the appearance of the actress on the cover. Then, he went back to the full-length mirror, and wiped his face with his right hand. When he looked in the mirror again, he saw a young lady with black hair that went past her shoulders and delicate facial features. It really works. Klein looked down at his chest, but he didn't see any protrusions. Trying hard to control his body, he managed to create a pair of cups by moving his fat and some of his flesh. However, there was nothing he could do about his lower body. That is to say, it is just a superficial change in appearance, nothing fundamental. Also, I can only grow taller or shorter by 10 centimeters at the moment. Going beyond this range would be difficult. Also, there's a limit to the enlargement and shrinkage of the head. For example, I can't mimic Father Yutravsky's half-giant head at all. Also, I can only observe the appearance and temperament of the target in an instant, without knowing anything related to him. It's easy for me to be exposed when facing a spectator like Miss Justice. Haha. In the clown stage, the clown restrains the spectator, but in the faceless stage, it is actually somewhat restrained by the spectator. Interesting. Upon having this thought, Klein stopped changing and returned to the appearance of Sherlock Moriarty. Divination, fighting, as well as a magician's beyonder powers have all been enhanced. As for how much they've improved, it can only be confirmed through practice. I should find some time to head to the Quelag Club tomorrow. Klein took one last look and went downstairs to clear up the mess. After rounding up everything, he quickly washed up and crawled into bed. Lying there, looking out the window at the crimson moonlight, he gradually calmed down. After a few minutes of this, Klein slowly closed his eyes and smiled to himself. Good night, Faceless. Chapter 452. Benson's Decision. Townsend Street, in between Empress Borough and West Borough. Xiao was standing in a dark, secluded alley. Even without looking up, she could see the countless magnificent palaces and tall Gothic towers in the distance. It was the highest district in the whole of Backlund, and it was also where the lone royal family resided. It shared the same, or even slightly higher status, as the White Maple Palace of Intis, and the Ormer Palace of the Fasak Empire in the southern and northern continent, and in the entire world. But its name was neither romantic nor ancient. It was called the Sodila Palace, and in ancient Fasak it meant balance. Zio looked away from the famous Bell of Order and directed her sight to the other side of the alley. In the shadows where the street lamps didn't shine, a figure slowly walked out. The figure wore a golden mask that revealed the lower half of his face. He was none other than the mysterious person who had previously sold the sheriff formula to Zio and had occasionally entrusted her with some tasks. When Zio and Furs discussed in private, they both suspected that the person was from MI9. Any progress this week? The man wearing the gold mask asked as per usual. Zio shook her head. No, I don't think anyone was keeping tabs on Capim before the incident. She paused for a moment, then she reluctantly asked, "Do you still want to continue investigating this matter?" The masked man was silent for a moment. "There's no need, but if you hear anything related in the future, then contact me right away. Today I'll give you a new mission." "What mission?" Zio was completely in her bounty hunter state, ready to assess the risks. The masked guy laughed. "This is a very simple mission, and it's one that you've been dreaming of doing. Seek to purchase the sheriff and interrogator main ingredients in all your circles, especially a special ingredient that can be directly concocted into a potion. If someone responds to it, we will pay for it." "The purchased ingredients will belong to me?" Zio blurted out a response. This was her greatest concern. "No. Do you believe that such a simple mission would have such a high reward?" "Of course. If you're able to fish out the person we're looking for, it's not impossible to negotiate and let you obtain the main ingredients," the masked man said with a chuckle. "But I don't know the main ingredients of the interrogator potion," Zio hesitantly said. "I'll tell you later. This is also our advance payment. Even if we don't find the target, you'll have the main portion of a sequence 7 potion formula, worth more than 600 pounds. I think you're fully aware of our generosity," the masked man said in a bewitching tone. "Generous indeed. Who's their target, and why are they willing to pay such a high price to find them?" "Well, if he were from MI9, taking advantage of this mission to retrieve the Beyonder ingredients of the Arbiter pathway on the market should also be one of his goals. There's no problem about wasting money. As quite an experienced bounty hunter, Zio instinctively thought of a few things. After some deliberation, she nodded and said, "I'll take this commission." "Very good." The masked man's tone turned relaxed as he surveyed his surroundings and said, "The interrogator potion's main ingredients are the horn of a flash-patterned black snake and dust of a lake spirit." After saying that, he slowly retreated and melted into the shadows, disappearing into the corner of the alley. "He really told me the main ingredients of the interrogator potion." Zio was momentarily stunned. Only at that point did she clearly realize how much importance the masked man's faction placed on this mission. "I wonder who their target is. It seems to be focused on some special ingredient that can be used to directly concoct a sheriff or interrogator potion." With this in mind, Zio suddenly froze up. She remembered one thing. When she advanced to sheriff, she had used a special ingredient she had bought through Furs, one that could be used to concoct the corresponding potion. Is that their target? Zio instinctively decided to keep silent on this matter, to never tell the masked man anything. She rubbed her fat baby cheeks and walked towards the street outside, ready to take a public carriage back to Cherwood Borough. At that moment, she saw a brown carriage drive past. Her eyes were instantly attracted by the coat of arms on the carriage. The coat of arms consisted of a single flower and 2 rings. There was nothing special about it, but Zio stared at it in a daze as though her gaze had frozen. It was only when the carriage was far away did she withdraw her gaze. Her mood immediately reached rock bottom. It didn't turn for the better, even when she returned to the shared rented house. Seeing that her friend was in a bad mood, Furs poured 2 glasses of red wine and brought them to her. "What happened?" She sat across her and pushed one of the glasses toward Zio. Zio looked down at the red wine. After a full 2 minutes of silence, she said in a slightly hoarse voice, "On the way back, I met someone I used to know." "Who?" Furs asked cooperatively. "Viscount Stratford." Zio replied to any question she received without elaborating. Furs thought for a moment and then she said, "This Viscount seems to be the captain of the Royal Guards?" As a best-selling novel author, she would receive invitations from noblemen who liked literature and participated in afternoon tea parties and banquets from time to time. With her professional habits of collecting material as a writer, she would certainly volunteer to understand more famous noblemen. It was at such a party that she got to know Viscount Glaint. Yes, he used to be my father's deputy, Zio said with some difficulty. Your father? Furs knew that Zio came from a fallen aristocratic family and had some secrets. However, she didn't know the specifics. Zio picked up the glass of red wine and gulped it down, coughing a few times after she choked. After calming herself down, she said, My family was once part of the aristocracy. In its heyday, it even served as an Earl Palatine. Earl Palatine? What position is that? Furs asked, half curious, half trying to soothe her friend's mood. It's equivalent to being the spokesperson for the royal family, nobles that are the closest to the throne, Zio said in recollection, her face jubilant. From that moment forth, our family had the fief a true earl would have, but it wasn't as illustrious during the time of my father. However, we still held the trust of the former king, Might Wielder William VI. He was the leader of the Household Guards Division and the captain of the Royal Guards. Her tone gradually turned melancholic, as she found it difficult to hide her pain. But 7 years ago, he was accused of participating in a revolt, and he was eventually executed and deprived of his aristocratic title and fiefdom. Because of this, my family fell from grace, and many of my family members even died for no reason. In order to live, we changed our surnames and left East Tucker County. I don't believe that my father would engage in mutiny. He was so loyal to the royal family, even more so than his belief in the goddess. Anyway, I left my mother and my younger brother and came to Backlund, looking for a chance to improve myself, hoping to restore my family's glory and my father's reputation. Zio was vague about some of the things midway through her recount, but Furs didn't mind. She sighed and said, It'll be very, very difficult. But she immediately smiled. But I will support you. And behind me is the mysterious tarot club, she added in her mind. Nighttime in Tingen City 2 Daffodil Street. Melissa, who was doing math problems, turned her head to the door and looked at Benson, who had just taken off his half-top hat. Where did you go? Aren't the results announced tomorrow? They're already available tonight, and I happen to know 2 of the city's employees who are in charge of the unified exam, Benson said with a smirk. In early December, he had enrolled for the Civil Servant Unified Examination, selected a relatively uncompetitive position, and in the process, established friendships with several civil servants and a number of examination candidates through his eloquence and communication skills. What was the result? Melissa unconsciously put down the fountain pen in her hand. Benson's expression immediately darkened, but before Melissa could open her mouth, he revealed a bright smile. I passed, and I'm ranked quite high. That's great. Melissa stood up and took 2 steps forward. You have to start preparing for the second round of exams at the end of January. It's held in Backlund. I need to prepare your luggage for you ahead of time. When are you planning on leaving? Seeing his sister's concern, Benson walked into the living room, smiled and said, I plan to do so after the new year. We'll go to Backlund together and rent a house there. Regardless of the success of the exam, I'm prepared to stay in Backlund and try my luck. And you can take advantage of the New Year's holiday to transfer to the technical school in Backlund to prepare for the entrance exam at the Backlund University of Technology and Industry in June. Just a month ago, the Backlund University of Technology and Industry had been reorganized and officially upgraded to a university for industry and technology. Melissa's lips unconsciously pursed as she quietly listened. She looked around wistfully and replied softly, Okay. Friday afternoon at the Quelag Club, Klein walked out and hired a carriage to head for Prince Edisac's Red Rose Manor. It was the place where Talum had gone to a few days before his death. As a qualified detective, he would be completely unworthy of the £100 he was paid if he didn't hold any investigations there. No matter what, I still have to put on a convincing act. Klein muttered as he sat in the carriage and enjoyed the scenery outside the window. After his morning practice, he had roughly grasped the range of improvements in every aspect. Flame controlling, flaming jump, and other beyonder powers had become about 30% stronger. The might of air bullets and the length of the underwater breathing pipe had even increased several-fold. His divination and combat skills had also received a substantial improvement. Paper figurine substitutes and damage transfer didn't experience much change, but because of the growth of his spirituality, the number of times that they could be used had increased. Klein finally arrived at Red Rose Manor amidst the rumbling journey and informed the two soldiers guarding the entrance of his purpose. After passing the news, he met the old butler from before. "You can ask everyone here." The white-haired elderly butler paused, then added, "Except that lady. That's what I want. I don't want to get into trouble." Klein laughed casually. "All right." Chapter 453. Stairs. Red Rose Manor. Outside the luxurious rooms filled with all kinds of antiques, Klein stood at the door and asked the sixth maid he had met today. The young maid was wearing a black and white servant dress that had the characteristics of the times. She was pretty, in her prime, and had natural curls to her brown hair. She had a hint of playfulness on her face. "Who does Mr. Talum meet when he visits?" Klein repeated the question numbly. The maid replied almost without a pause. "Mr. Talum usually requests to meet His Highness, or to accompany him in riding horses, or to discuss matters. If His Highness happens to be absent, he will meet with that lady. They are very good friends. He receives permission from the butler." Talum is good friends with the commoner lady who Prince Edisac likes? Meeting in private from time to time? It was likely that he was persuading her to leave this place, so as to not affect the reputation of the prince. Klein nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Talum and the young lady, what would they talk about? When he asked this question, Klein suddenly recalled how Talum had fallen in love just recently. With his rich experience from the information age, he somehow came up with an extremely contrived romance story. The maid wasn't afraid of the detective. She smiled, shook her head, and said, "At times like these, we're all asked to leave the room." This, even more than ever, Klein couldn't resist making associations, even to the point of changing the colors of Prince Edisac's hat and helmet. Without waiting for him to ask any further questions, the maid chuckled and said, "Detective Moriarty, if you want to find out exactly what the lady and Mr. Talum were talking about, you can ask her directly. The old butler doesn't permit that." Klein confidently pushed out his scapegoat. He changed the topic and said with a smile, "You seem to know more than the other servants. You even know to call me Detective Moriarty." The maid looked around, maintained her smile, and said, "It's because I've been serving the lady during my rotations. She's always wanted to meet you, Detective Moriarty. After all, she's close friends with Mr. Talum and cares a great deal about his death. Unfortunately, she always ends up missing you. Always." Klein was sensitive to the words always, just happened, and missed. The maid nodded seriously and said, "The first time His Highness invited you to be his guest, she intentionally threw a tantrum and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to walk downstairs to meet you. Who knew that you would leave in a hurry? Afterwards, she took the initiative to represent His Highness to place flowers on Mr. Talum's grave. But as she didn't know what you looked like, she wasn't able to find you. And today, she just happened to go to the golf course out back to relax on horseback. Otherwise, even if the butler didn't allow it, she would have tried to find a way to meet you. What a coincidence." Klein sighed as he suddenly grasped a crucial point. On the day of Talum's funeral, it was the commoner lady he loved who had offered flowers in the prince's place. On that day, Klein was most concerned about the lady with the black veil and the sapphire ring on her finger. She might have a grade 0 sealed artifact, or some powerful existence of an equal level. All of a sudden, a thought flashed through Klein's mind. The woman with the sapphire ring on her finger was wearing a long, heavy black dress. Accompanied by two maids, she slowly disappeared into the distance. One of the ladies had brown natural curls. The image of the maid quickly overlapped with the one in front of Klein, and it was abnormally identical. Klein's body tensed up, and sweat rolled down his back, but his expression didn't change at all. Using the abilities of a clown, he pretended like he was recalling the event. And he asked with a smile, "Were you with that lady on the day of Talim's funeral?" The maid replied without much thought, "Yes." "Damn, it's really her." Klein maintained his smile. "Very well, next question." As if nothing had happened, he began to inquire about other things. Then he switched to another servant and continued. However, Klein secretly shortened the process and sped up the progress. He wanted to leave Red Rose Manor before the young lady returned from her riding. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, before the sky had turned dark, Klein left the manor much earlier than expected and took the carriage sent by the old butler back to the city. Sitting in the window with his back against the wall wrapped in silk and muslin, he was relieved to have the energy to reflect on the whole situation. It was Prince Edisac's beloved commoner lady who had cursed Talim. Why did she have to deal with a descendant of a fallen noble family? To take revenge against Talim for trying to break up the relationship between her and the prince? But there's no need for her to do it herself. She can find a chance to mention it while in bed. Prince Edisac has plenty of ways to make Talim disappear without a sound. Talim was in a state of deep love before he died. Yes, the first sign was after he successfully persuaded the commoner lady to leave Prince Edisac. They had an affair? So, the commoner lady who was brought back to the manor killed Talim in order to silence him and remove any latent dangers? Logically speaking, it makes sense. But the problem is, how could a person with a grade 0 sealed artifact or a powerhouse of an equivalent level be restricted by Prince Edisac? Even if the Augustus family is an angel family, with the accumulation of enough knowledge, they would still need to use tremendous strength and special methods to be able to restrain someone like that. This isn't something a prince can do. Besides, how could such a figure have taken a fancy to Talim? Why does she want to see me all the time? Did she sense that I'm using the gray fog to spy on her? No, if that were the case, I would have been buried with Talim on the day of his funeral. Besides, when she first wanted to see me, I didn't have any blood, hair, or belongings. I hadn't made any divinations yet. Klein was puzzled as he thought about it. In the end, he decided to bury the problem deep within his heart. He wasn't to probe or investigate. I hope that the machinery hive mind, with my earlier reminder, will pay importance to this matter of noticing the royal family's abnormality. Yes, they might regard it with great importance. Not because of Prince Edisac's reputation, but for another reason. I hope the royal family continues to prevent the lady from visiting me. After a few days, when the time is right, I'll relinquish this mission, express how powerless I am on this matter, and then use the excuse of going to the south for a holiday to change my identity and hide for a while. Klein's heart gradually calmed down. Evenings in Backland were always replaced by dark clouds and drizzling rain, and Klein, who felt physically and mentally exhausted, held down his half-top hat and walked quickly across the wet street to number 15 Minsk Street under the illumination of the street lamps. After resting for a bit and taking advantage of the dark surroundings, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. After advancing to sequence 6 Faceless, he had always wanted to check the mysterious space to see if there were any changes. However, as he was too tired last night and couldn't wake up in the middle of the night, he had to wait until he was done being busy outside. In addition, Klein had to eliminate any interference in order to divine a particular matter. That was, after this advancement, when his spirituality wasn't stable yet, he didn't hear the illusory ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Anymore. He wanted to know if this was a natural change after ascending to sequence 6, or if there was some other reason. Within the majestic palace, the mottled bronze tables and the 22 high back chairs with different symbols on their backs stood quietly, as if they had remained unchanged since time immemorial. The same was true for the gray fog below them, as well as the endless emptiness around them. But as soon as Klein entered, his spiritual intuition was keenly aware that the mysterious space was somewhat different from before. He was in no hurry to explore or make any attempts. Calming himself down, he sat at the end of the table, conjured a pen and paper, and wrote a divination statement. The reason why I haven't heard any ravings after my advancement. Holding the piece of paper and muttering the sentence, Klein leaned back in his chair and quickly entered the dreamland with the help of cogitation. In the dusky sky and land, images flashed, and in the end, they all came to a stop on a particular scene. It was Klein, whose face and body was still covered in pale granules. He was surrounded by an illusory, thin layer of gray fog that was undetectable. The dream shattered. Klein opened his eyes and roughly understood the reason. The gray fog has interwoven with reality, helping me block out the ravings that come from who knows where. After advancing to sequence 6, my connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog has become even stronger, thus bringing about certain changes and allowing me to naturally borrow a portion of its powers? From the looks of it, that should be the case. Yes, I should try to explore the area and see if there are any changes. Klein slowly stood up and followed his spiritual perception, walking in a certain direction outside the ancient palace. Beneath his feet was the gray fog that spread out like the sea. He finally decided to stop after walking for an unknown period of time. However, when he gave up on exploring, a light suddenly flickered at the end of the path. In his joy, Klein quickened his pace and approached. 7 or 8 seconds later, he saw a flight of stairs that seemed to lead to heaven. The staircase was formed from pure light. It was wholly transparent and untainted, capable of shocking anyone's heart. There were only 4 levels as the staircase reached up into the void, and each level was rather high, as though it was meant for creatures even larger than giants. Klein looked up, followed its path, and saw a layer of grayish-white fog, condensed and suspended in midair, as though it was supporting something. It was a significant distance from the staircase of light. The 4-step staircase represents my consumption of the Sequence 9, Sequence 8, Sequence 7, and Sequence 6 potions? What exactly is above that layer of fog? Klein cautiously advanced until he reached the staircase of light and stepped onto it. There was nothing odd about the steps, and they were as solid as stone. Klein went up the stairs, climbed up to the 4th level, and then tried to look up at the area above the gray fog. Unfortunately, his vision couldn't penetrate anything. He thought for a moment, then he took 2 steps forward and jumped up with all his might. However, the moment he left the staircase of light, he lost his momentum and his spirit body's flight instinct. He plummeted straight down and landed on the bottom layer of the gray fog. Looks like I need to advance another 2 to 3 other sequences. If sequence 4 really does result in a qualitative change, then I should be able to see after becoming a demigod. Klein looked up and made a judgment. Chapter 454. Who am I? After looking around, Klein, who had found nothing else, returned to the stone pillar-propped ancient palace. He sat at the head of the long bronze table with his eyes half closed. He examined his spirituality growth with the number of members he could draw in, including the empty positions that I could handle from before. I can still recruit 4 new members. However, there are no suitable targets at the moment. Klein shook his head and muttered before returning to the real world to busy himself for a good dinner. After slicing potatoes, boiling beef, adding onions and stir-frying them for a while, as well as sprinkling seasonings like sugar and pepper, Klein poured the prepared hot water into the saucepan, covered it with a lid, and turned the fire down. I have to admit that a magician's flame controlling is a good helper in the kitchen. Ever since I got it, my culinary skills have clearly improved. If it wasn't for the loss of control, the monsters, the searches, and the evil gods, the world would be at peace and perfect if everyone was dedicated to using their abilities without causing public damage. Klein sighed and left the kitchen to enter the living room. As the light from the wall lamps spilled out, Klein, who had been planning on flipping through magazines and wait for the appropriate time to throw in the potatoes, carrots, and the proper amount of salt, he couldn't help thinking about how to act as a faceless. Just after waking up this morning, my spirituality had completely stabilized. I discovered that although there aren't any signs of digesting the faceless potion in me, I do have a certain level of harmony. This is a phenomenon that never happened after consuming the seer, clown, and magician potions. With this in mind, Klein looked up at the oriel window. As it was already dark outside, it had become like a mirror, faithfully reflecting Sherlock Moriarty with his black hair, brown eyes, beard, and gold-rimmed glasses. Klein nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it's because I've always been acting as Klein Moretti. Yes, in a way, Sherlock Moriarty is just Klein's disguise, not someone else. Although I've received many memory fragments and gained some of the original's feelings that previously existed, in essence, I'm still a guest from an alternate world. I am Earth's keyboard warrior Zhoming Rue. I've been through so much in the last 5 months that sometimes I even think I'm Klein Moretti. Amidst the silence, many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, giving him a lot of insight. However, I'm still Zhoming Rue, who's donning the skin of Klein Moretti, someone who has never given up the idea of returning. He slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the figure reflected on the oriel window had already changed. It was a young man with dark brown eyes and short black hair. His facial features were unremarkable, and he appeared refined, but he had obvious eye bags with an inkling of a double chin. This was Zhoming Rue from Earth. Long time no see. Klein sighed, raised his hands and rubbed his face. By the time he lowered his arms, he was back as Sherlock Moriarty. After this period of contemplation and adjustment, he inexplicably felt that the gap between his spirituality and the potion had reduced significantly, and there were signs of them slowly blending together. No wonder Nimblewright Master Rosego's teacher. Yes, perhaps his teacher would say that you can disguise yourself as anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. This is likely a core rule of a faceless acting method. Once one forgets this point, it would be easy to forget yourself amidst the constant changes, eventually turning into a monster. Klein felt enlightened when he recalled what he had previously obtained via spirit channeling. He crossed his right leg and leaned back, quickly coming up with a plan for the future. Search for and conclude the actual acting rules for a faceless. In the Beyonder circles of Backland, through the Tarot Club, gather information about mermaids, in preparation to complete the ritual at sea. Directly or indirectly get the Solar High Priest potion formula to help Little Sun advance to Sequence 7, so that he has the clearance to obtain the method for removing a rampager's mental corruption on a Beyonder characteristic. But I can't fully place my hopes on Little Sunday. I should still attempt to look. Klein, whose mood was slowly turning staid, snapped his fingers, reducing the stove's fire in the kitchen as the fragrance of beef emanated. At that moment he heard the doorbell ring. The visitor was none other than Lawyer Jürgen. Even though it was drizzling and the ground was wet, Jürgen was still dressed meticulously. He even wore a vertical collar. "What's the matter?" Klein, who was very familiar with Jürgen, didn't make any small talk and directly asked. Jürgen put away his black umbrella, patted a few drops of water off of his double-breasted frock coat and said, "Sherlock, I'm leaving Backland on Monday next week to go south on a holiday with my grandmother. The warm environment and the clean air suits her very well." "That's excellent news," Klein took the initiative to deduce, smiling as he asked, "You want me to temporarily adopt Brody?" Jürgen shook his head gravely. "My grandma can't bear to part with Brody, and insisted on taking him with her. I've already asked. As long as we put him in a cage and buy a full-price ticket, he can board the steam locomotive. But we have to keep the cage clean at all times to not pollute the air above. Honestly, the smell in the third-class carriage is enough to overwhelm the stench of cat poop." Klein chuckled. "Brody shouldn't be too happy to leave, right?" "But he's even more reluctant to part with my grandmother," Jürgen replied. He pressed his hat and changed the subject. "I'm here to inform you that if you need to be released on bail, or settle any legal disputes during this period of time, you can go to my colleague. Here is his business card. I've already informed him that he wouldn't be leaving Backland this year." What a professional, to think that he even considered this problem. "However, I don't need to do that for now. I'm now an informant for the machinery hive mind, and I won't be remanded at the police station under normal circumstances." Klein thanked him with a smile, took the name card, and slipped it into his pocket. Jürgen didn't have any intention of chatting or entering the room. He immediately raised his hand and said, "I still have to visit the rest of my clients. Sherlock, I'll see you tomorrow." "No, I'll see you next year." Then I must wish your family a happy new year in advance. Klein smiled and waved. After watching Jurgen leave with his umbrella, Klein closed the door and sat back down in the living room. At this moment, apart from the flame which was licking the bottom of the pot in the kitchen, there were no other sounds coming from the house. It was so quiet that Klein could hear the carriages outside moving in the distance. He looked around slowly and saw the coffee table, contracts, cupboards, pens, porcelain cups, dining table, chairs, and walls. Retracting his gaze, Klein leaned back against the sofa and looked out the window at the dark night, and the street lamps emitting a misty glow in the dark. In the deep cold silence he sighed. The new year. The lightning gradually calmed down, and the darkness became the ruler of the earth. The exploratory team from the City of Silver finally reached their destination, after a short but, at the same time, not short trek in numerous battles. On both sides of the street, most of the houses had collapsed. Only a few could barely hold on, but their surfaces were mottled with the dust of time. With the help of an animal hide lantern whose light didn't reach far, Derek Berg saw the completely collapsed walls and streets that were in such ruin that even weeds didn't grow. On both sides of the streets were half-collapsed houses, with a tiny minority barely standing. However, their surfaces were mottled and filled with signs of aging. The white and blue colors that formed the foundation of the coatings, the pointed structures which were different from the City of Silver, had already turned gray, making it hard for anyone to imagine their original appearance. However, Derek could figure out the city's past through such observations. It had definitely experienced a long history, with a considerable number of inhabitants, developing its own civilization in the Dark Ages. The humans here took potions, built and repaired buildings, and defended the city wall. About 6 teams or more had explored the outside and hunted monsters in search of the necessary resources to survive. They would celebrate for any brief periods of calm, offering sacrifices to the gods and yearning for a response. They gave birth to the next generation, allowing hope to continue. However, in the end, they disappeared into the darkness, losing all their voices and leaving behind only ruins. The ruins were like a huge grave, burying a civilization that had struggled to survive, but eventually vanishing dismally. Demon Hunter Colin looked around, his expression somewhat solemn, as though he saw the future of the City of Silver. He pointed ahead and said, "The other places have already been cleared. The temple is in the center of the city." The exploratory team dispersed a bit, but they still maintained sufficient order and didn't let down their guard. After passing through ruins that had been destroyed for an unknown period of time, and went past streets so quiet that they drove people mad, Derek finally saw a high, wide, artificially made platform. On top of the high platform, there was a half-collapsed building. It looked extremely similar to the temples in the City of Silver. It had a dome propped up by pillars, creating an arched entrance. The style of the buildings here was completely different from that of the other buildings. It really is true that they later converted to the fallen creator. The thought had barely crossed Derek's mind when the 4 lanterns in the team went out at the same time. All of a sudden, the exploratory team was plunged into pure darkness. There was no lightning in the sky, the candles on the ground had extinguished, and all human breathing seemed to disappear at once. Derek's body immediately tensed, as he felt as if some monster had stuck its tongue out in the darkness and was trying to lick his scalp. But his spiritual perception told him that nothing real had appeared. At that moment, an immature, helpless, terrified, and dry voice sounded out by his ear. It was a child whispering, "Save me, save me." For a moment Derek froze, not knowing how to react, but in an instant, a coruscating glimmer of dust appeared before him. The dust exploded one after another, igniting a silvery white light that illuminated the surrounding area. Colin stared at Derek and said in a deep voice, "What's on your mind?" Derek instantly snapped to his senses and clasped his hands in shame and pressed them to his mouth and nose as if in prayer. His body immediately emitted rays of clean, pure light, causing the surrounding darkness to silently disperse. The other team members seized the moment to reignite the candles. Because of the demon hunter's timely reaction, no members disappeared this time, nor were there any new members appearing. Colin retracted his gaze from Derek and looked at the half-collapsed temple on the high platform. He solemnly said, "From now on, we can't afford to be careless. We have to be on full alert." Chapter 455. Help Seeker within the half-collapsed temple. Only a few stone pillars remained intact as they collectively supported half of the main hall. At the very front of the main hall, there was an altar covered in cracks. In the middle of the altar, there was a huge pitch-black cross. Hanging from the cross was a naked man who was hanging upside down. Around his ankles, thighs, and torso there were obvious rusty metal spikes protruding outward that were accompanied by bright red bloodstains. Derek knew that this was the statue of the fallen creator, but he couldn't help look down to size up the statue's face. He saw the face of the statue. The nose, mouth, and ears were all blurry, except for the eyes which were carved with abnormal clarity. The fallen creator's eyes were tightly shut, as though he was suffering from guilt and pain. "Look away, don't study the statue of an evil god," Demon Hunter Colin warned in a low voice. "Yes, Your Excellency." The few members of the exploratory team immediately retracted their gazes. Before today, although the City of Silver had discovered many destroyed cities and written records pointing to evil gods during their explorations, most of the residents had never seen the statues of so-called evil gods. The remaining area of the temple wasn't very wide, so the exploratory team quickly split up into groups of 2 or 3 and completed the investigations without finding anything abnormal. Upon seeing this, Colin, the chief of the 6-member council, said after a few seconds of deliberation, "Let's head underground." As he spoke, he drew one of the 2 swords he carried on his back and smeared it with a grayish-silver ointment. Then, he removed a small metal bottle from a hidden compartment on his belt, pulled out the stopper, and gulped the contents of the potion. At this moment, Derek felt as if the light blue eyes of the chief had become a little brighter. The members of the exploratory team made their utmost careful preparations. Under the illumination of the 4 animal hide lanterns, they followed the stairs on the left side of the statue as they walked down into the underground area. Derek took his turn holding the lantern, walking at the front left as he cautiously entered the darkness. He heard the sound of his own footsteps and those of his companions echoing off of the stone steps. They produced a distant and empty echo. The echoes didn't suffer from any interference, making the absolute silence beneath them obvious. However, in the hearts of the exploratory team members, it was like a knock on the door. The attempt to uncover a secret that had been buried for an unknown number of years left them feeling extremely tense. After walking without having any sense of time, Derek finally saw that the road ahead had turned flat. He also saw the newly discovered mural, which the corrupted Dark Regents had mentioned. The mural was spread across 2 sides of the wall. It was simply colored and gloomy, looking ancient as if it had seen the vicissitudes of life. Derek took a casual glance and was immediately attracted by one of the murals. On the wall to the left up ahead, a pure white cross was depicted in the middle. It was surrounded by seawater-like blackness, drowning all the humans who were struggling as they stretched out their arms. Hanging upside down from the cross was the fallen creator. The rusted nails and blood-red stains were no different from the statues in the outside world. But in this mural, the fallen creator was suffering from a black erosion, so much so that part of the white of the cross had become pitch black. In addition, the cross supported a hazy piece of land, and countless humans were kneeling and praying to the fallen creator. Around the mural, in the deepest part of the darkness, there were 6 figures akin to evil gods. In the upper left corner was a woman wearing a black classical dress. Her clothes were layered but not complicated, and it was embedded with a starry sheen. Her body was relatively ethereal, with signs of rippling outward. Her face was blurry, as though she was wearing a mask without any facial features. The darkness around her surged as one strange eye after another faintly became discernible. Directly above was a young man wearing a pure white robe. His face was painted with a pure gold color, and there were tentacles in the form of light growing out of his skin. In his hands was a putrid green book and a radiant spear, and his chest and back were inverted. In the upper right corner was a trident-wielding monster with an octopus-like head, wide eyes, and a body wrapped in lightning. The feathers of countless birds formed his cloak, and the darkness turned into waves that supported the bottom of his feet. At the bottom right was a supple and beautiful woman. Her chest bulged, propping her clothes up. In her arms was a rotting baby, and at her feet were black ears of wheat, spring water squirming with flesh, herbs dripping with pus, and wildly mating animals. Directly below was an old man wearing a hood that revealed his mouth, wrinkles, and a white beard. The old man held an open book, and on top of it was an eye that was the symbol of omniscience. At first glance, this old man looked the most normal, but the smile on his face was indescribably evil. At the bottom left was a giant warrior in tattered armor. He held a long sword, and was sitting on a throne with bleak dusk as its backdrop. What this mural means is that when the cataclysm struck, the evil gods climbed out of the abyss. In order to save the people of the world, the fallen creator had suffered the vast majority of the sins and pain, and as a result, showed signs of being corrupted and having his image change. But I think he is the worst evil god. Carrying an animal hide lantern in his hand, Derek looked at the mural on the wall as he walked. He realized that the description was identical to Dark Regence's description, with the core theme being that the place where they were had not been abandoned by the gods. Instead, it was blessed by the Creator and had maintained civilization through the apocalypse. Of course, Dark Regence had only briefly mentioned it, and the details were far what the murals depicted. Throughout the entire process, Derek didn't let his guard down. He prepared himself in case any accidents were to happen, so that he could respond immediately. Under the dim yellow light of the candle, the exploratory team went through many corridors, halls, and rooms one by one, delving deep into the temple's basement. Suddenly, a semi-open gray stone door appeared in front of them. Outside the door, a cluster of beautiful mushroom-shaped objects grew. They were palm-sized, with white stems and bright red heads, sparkling with dark golden specks. Upon seeing these mushrooms, the members of the exploratory team had their appetites whet. All they wanted to do was to rush over, pull out a stalk, and stuff it into their mouths. Gulp. Quite a few people swallowed their saliva. However, most of the people who were able to enter the exploratory team had rich experience and were of a relatively high sequence. Having received a warning beforehand, someone immediately stood up and said in a low voice, "Those are rotten flesh and hairy scalps." Derek knew this teammate, and that his name was Joshua. He had successfully traded for a mystical item from a particular exploratory expedition. Joshua stretched out his left, scarlet-gloved hand at the door. With a flash of light, a burning fireball quickly took shape and shot out, landing directly on those extremely tempting mushrooms. Boom! The ground trembled slightly, and an inferno spread out to cover the space of 2 meters. By the time the fire subsided, all of the mushrooms had already disappeared, leaving only bits and pieces of flesh and blood. It left all of the Beyonders, who nearly failed to resist the temptation, disgusted. Demon Hunter Colin didn't interfere with the actions of the team. He quietly watched from the side, nodding from time to time. Why would there be mushrooms made from flesh and hair? Where did the flesh and hair come from? Joshua withdrew his left palm and muttered to himself in confusion. Another member of the team made a bold guess. The original inhabitants of this city? It's possible. Perhaps their deaths were a result of turning into pure flesh and hair. Derek agreed inwardly. After a brief discussion, the exploratory team split into several groups and cleaned up the hall outside the gray stone door. After doing all this, they regrouped and slowly passed through the door, ready to engage in combat at any moment. Behind the door was a place that looked like an altar. The surrounding light could hardly dispel the darkness of the region, which seemed to hide something unknown. Above the altar, a similar pitch-black cross and an upside-down fallen creator was erected there. Carrying an animal hide lantern, Derek stood the closest as he instinctively swept a glance. His gaze suddenly froze because he discovered that the fallen creator statue here was different from the one outside. Its eyes were open. He had blood-red eyes and black pupils, staring straight at any intruders like it possessed life. Tat, tat, tat. Derek heard the chattering of teeth. He originally imagined that it came from a team member, but he soon realized that he was the one trembling. Although he didn't understand much about the evil god's dangers, his teeth were instinctively chattering at that instant. Tat, tat, tat. His teammates reacted similarly. At that moment, a speck of powder floated into the air. Demon Hunter Colin clenched his fist. Boom! As the sound of thunder reverberated through the air, Derek and the others suddenly snapped to their senses, escaping their nightmare state from earlier. Before they could investigate the area, the sound of weeping could be heard from behind the altar. Sob, sob, sob. Sob, sob, sob. In the chilling silence, Demon Hunter Colin calmly ordered, Derek, Joshua, go around and take a look. As a chill went through his body, Derek held the animal hide lantern and the axe of hurricane in his hand. Together with Joshua, he slowly walked around to the back of the altar. As the darkness was gradually dispersed by the light, they saw a black figure curled up behind the altar. After taking 2 steps forward, the shadow revealed its original form. It was a 7 or 8-year-old child with soft yellow hair. He closed his eyes, as though he wasn't used to the light as he shouted in excitement. Save me, save me. Derek's pupils shrank, and when he thought of the cry for help he had heard in the pure darkness earlier, he subconsciously lifted his axe of hurricane. At this moment, Demon Hunter Colin took a step forward and solemnly asked, Who are you? The child stopped pleading for help and said reminiscently, My name is Jack. After dinner, Klein put on his coat and hat in preparation to head out. He was going to find Miss Sharon, resolve the problem of the baronet digging up a tunnel, and ask for clues about mermaids. He wanted to complete these matters before Detective Sherlock Moriarty headed south for a vacation. Chapter 456. Playing ghosts outside the Bravehearts bar. A rental carriage briskly drove by. Inside the carriage, Klein, who was wearing a half-top hat, was sitting opposite Sharon, who was still wearing her black Gothic regal dress. Looking at the expressionless and pale face of his former bodyguard, Klein was at a loss on how to exchange pleasantries. He could only go straight to the point. I'm done with my preparations. Although Sequence 6 Faceless had only given him 1 Beyonder ability, all the powers he had before had experienced a clear upgrade, resulting in a great improvement to his strength. This was the best form of preparation. However, a faceless powers could be deemed a godly skill in certain situations. For example, when being pursued or trying to infiltrate, Klein couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. Sharon listened quietly and simply said, Tonight? She spoke with a slight rise in intonation towards the end to indicate an inquiry. If it's fine with you, then I'm fine as well, Klein responded, prepared. All right. Sharon nodded. After a few seconds of silence, Klein asked in deliberation, Have you heard about anything to do with mermaids? Do you know where one can meet such a creature of legends? Sharon's blue eyes stared unblinkingly at Klein, as though she had transformed into a real doll. After a while, she emotionlessly said, There are no longer mermaids in places where humans can reach. Only the fishermen of the Gargas Islands would occasionally hear the mermaids singing in the midst of a storm during their long voyages to hunt white-tailed whales. Located in the depths of the Sonia Sea, the Gargas Islands was the farthest human colony in the sea, characterized by local products such as whale oil and whale meat. I wonder if this rumor is true or fake. Klein nodded. I understand. The bell chimes in the night rang out quietly, as though they came from a faraway place. There was an abandoned chapel in the middle of William Street. Withered vines crawled over its walls and gray stones were strewn everywhere. Inside the chapel, feces and debris intertwined amidst the rocks and dead grass. In the half-collapsed corner, a middle-aged man, wearing black tights, was moving stones that hid the entrance to a cave. He carefully and excitedly went into the tunnel, carrying his digging tools, lighting tools, and earth basket. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes were puffy. He was Baronet Rafter Pound, who was considered mentally ill by the outside world. But he was secretly a descendant of the Tudor family of the Fourth Epoch. This prodigy, who was always entangled with high-class call girls, had a serious expression on his face, and his eyes were bright. It was impossible to find any signs of him being addicted to drinking and sex. He pushed himself up on his elbows and rapidly crawled down the slope, as though the end of the tunnel hid the greatest and only hope of his life. Not long after, he touched the wet mud and cold stone in front of him. This didn't extinguish Rafter Pound's enthusiasm. He repeated motions that he was extremely proficient with after having recently gained the experience. As he was digging, carrying, and moving things, an empty area appeared before him. It was a dark underground palace that was in front of him. Rafter Pound's expression immediately became crazed with excitement. He quickly moved forward and grabbed the black iron badge. The badge was a hand holding a scepter. Seeing this, Rafter Pound's eyes lit up as if they were on fire. Just as he put the black iron badge on his chest, everything in front of him shattered. He was still in the narrow and irregular tunnel, with wet mud and ice-cold stones in front of him. No, there was someone else there who was quietly watching him. He had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no eyebrows, and no ears. Rafter Pound's pupils contracted. He could only feel a numbness rising along his spine from his waist down to the back of his head. Without even thinking about it, he immediately threw away all his tools and frantically retreated. His elbows smacked the ground, but he felt no pain despite having a mangled wound. Finally, Rafter Pound left the tunnel and returned to the abandoned chapel. Because of the loss of his lantern, he could only see the deep darkness and the dim crimson that shrouded the edges. Suddenly, the withered vines that were crawling up the wall swayed like snakes. A figure walked out from the darkness. She was wearing a Gothic regal dress and a black small soft hat, with a pale face to the point of being transparent, as well as pale blonde hair and blue eyes that didn't look human. Rafter Pound almost shouted out loud. For such a woman to appear in an environment such as this was no different from a ghost story from folklore. Tap, tap, tap. He took a few steps back and almost tripped over a rock. At that moment, he seemed to think of something, and he suppressed his horror in an instant, revealing an excited and hopeful expression. Are you that evil spirit inside the underground palace? Yes, it must be you, Sir Pound. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Faceless Klein came out of the tunnel and stood in the shadows. His and Sharon's original plan had been to scare Rafter Pound off, scaring him so badly that he would no longer dare to explore the underground ruins again. However, Rafter Pound's reaction was somewhat out of their expectations. Sharon was silent for a second before tacitly asking, "What do you wish to say?" Rafter Pound quietly exhaled, and he then curled his lips into a smile. After attempting for so many years, I believe you already understand that killing the descendants of the Tudor family won't help you break the seal. Only by working with me, who has the great Tudor bloodline, can you hope to get out of this predicament that has lasted for more than 2,000 years. The Tudors knew about the existence of the evil spirit, but they still died in that room. Klein frowned as spoke before Sharon could. He imitated Sharon's ethereal voice. What took you until today to come here? This was a branch of the faceless beyond her powers, to mimic the sound of a target. He could reproduce any voice as long as he heard it before. Of course, Klein believed he couldn't repeat the ravings of the true creator and the pleas of Mr. Dorr. This beyond her power was still limited to the realm of ordinary people. Sharon looked sideways at him, but didn't expose him. Rafter Pound didn't notice and chuckled. It's because the Dark Emperor has appeared. Fate tells me that the glory of the Blood Emperor will appear once again. Is there some logical connection? Klein had an inexplicable feeling that Rafter Pound was more like a madman than before. He asked in Sharon's voice again, Dark Emperor? Haha. Rafter Pound laughed. Yes, Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. He must be closely related to the real Dark Emperor. Why don't I know that? Klein felt amused. He thought for a moment. Then he stopped asking, giving up the right to ask questions. Sharon, for some reason, remained silent. Upon seeing this, Rafter Pound was overjoyed as he quickly asked, So what's your answer? I refuse, Sharon replied emotionlessly. Rafter suppressed his anxiety and tried to persuade her again. At this moment, his eyes suddenly glazed over as he abruptly took a few steps to the side, arriving at a relatively intact stone wall. This, Klein and Sharon noticed an abnormality at the same time. They responded in their own ways, one pulling out a revolver and pointing it at Rafter Pound, the other filling the ruined chapel with a crimson lunar brilliance. Rafter Pound didn't even look at them. He faced the stone wall and slammed his head into it. Thump, thump, thump. He slammed his head 3 times in a row and fainted with blood dripping from his forehead. Then he got up again. His eyes were bloodshot for some unknown reason. Rafter Pound raised his right hand and wiped the blood from his forehead, covering his palm with blood. He stuck out the tip of his tongue, licked the scarlet liquid, and said in an intoxicated manner, "A member of the Tudor bloodline sure is delicious. It's really intoxicating. It will allow my loathing to exceed its limits to the greatest extent, and it will help me temporarily expand the boundary of the seal." Klein's muzzle was aimed at him as he asked in a stunned tone, "The evil spirit in the ruins?" Blood trickled across Rafter Pound's face, and he laughed horribly. "You guessed right. Before I judged that you were weak and wanted to corrupt your mind and enter your dreams to tempt you into rescuing me. Who knows, you're also a person with a secret." "Don't be so direct." Klein subconsciously glanced at Sharon, but he found nothing out of the ordinary about her. "What do you want to do?" Klein asked directly. The evil spirit sighed. "I'm an innocent person who was harmed because of Alista Tudor's ambition. Due to the constraints of my corpse, I've been trapped in that underground ruin for nearly 2,000 years. I hope that you can help me out of this predicament and allow me to become a free spirit. I swear I won't involve innocent people." After saying that, he looked at Sharon with his bloodshot eyes. "You should be a wraith from the mutant pathway. The next stop is a critical point to becoming a demigod. I'm not sure if you have the puppet potion formula, but I can help you obtain it. I can even be a part of your ritual. That is the reward I can promise you." Puppet, sequence 4 of the mutant pathway is called Puppet? What a strange name. Klein muttered inwardly. The evil spirit turned to look at him. "You will similarly be rewarded. It's an object that can be considered mystical and precious, and because of some sort of attraction, its holder came to the underground palace and died by the side of the Tudor descendants. This is what it looks like." As he spoke, the evil spirit spread open the palm of his hand, causing the crimson moonlight to form a scene. Inside the picture, there was a normal-looking tarot card. The image on it was completely different from the others. Sitting inside a chariot wasn't a king, but rather a male priest wearing a dark red robe. The priest looked like Roselle Gustave. "This, a card of blasphemy." Klein's eyes instantly shifted. He saw that the starlight in the upper left corner had condensed into a line of text. Sequence 0, Red Priest. Chapter 457. Information provided by the evil spirit. Sequence 0, Red Priest. Which pathway? Sequence 0 is this? I've learned the true name of another Sequence 0. Of course, the pretext is that the evil spirit isn't lying. It said that the holder of the Red Priest card would seek out the underground ruins of the Tudor family due to some form of attraction, but they ended up dying in that room. This should be the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics within the same pathway, right? No. Emperor Roselle had apparently mentioned that after advancing to become a high-sequence beyonder, possessing a corresponding card of blasphemy would allow them to subtly sense the beyonder ingredients needed for subsequent sequences. In other words, the room where the evil spirit is sealed has a demigod-ranked characteristic of the Red Priest path of the divine hidden within. Perhaps the evil spirit was a demigod of this pathway when it was still alive, and it might even be a little stronger. The subtle sensation provided by the card of blasphemy is probably a result of the law of convergence. Klein suddenly thought of many things. He subconsciously turned his head to look at Sharon to see her reaction. By doing so, he could determine if she knew about the card of blasphemy and whether she understood the meaning of a sequence 0. However, there was no change in Sharon's nearly transparent face. It was as if the evil spirit had just shown an ordinary tarot card. However, this actually implies something. When any beyonder first come to learn of a sequence 0, they will subconsciously think about what it represented. Perhaps only a beyonder in the spectator pathway can read the subtle body language of Miss Sharon. Klein sighed to himself. Seeing that both of them were silent at the same time, the evil spirit gave Klein a deep glance, slowly making the projection of the card of blasphemy disappear. It once again looked at Sharon with its bloodshot eyes, and said with a low and hoarse laugh, "If you are unwilling to become a demigod of the mutant pathway, then I can provide you with the sequence 4 potion formula of the abyss pathway. The temperance of desire and the flamboyance of malice has always been very congruous, isn't it?" Sharon ignored the evil spirit's question and turned unhurriedly to Klein, leaving him to respond. What the evil spirit means is that the mutant pathway and the abyss pathway are closely related pathways, which are exchangeable at high sequences. How the Rose School of Thought and the Blood Sanctify sect act on the surface does seem very similar. Klein thought for 2 seconds and looked at the bloodied rafter pound. Then, how can your seal be removed? The evil spirit laughed and said, "Very simple. Find a direct descendant of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici family, and obtain 10 milliliters of their blood each. A little more is fine, but not less. Then mix them with holy water and pour them into my room. This way the seal will be lifted." It's a very simple and strange method. Even in the field of mysticism it's rare. Why must they be direct descendants of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici families? I have never heard of the last one. Sauron is the former royal family of Intis, and Einhorn is the royal family of the Faesac Empire. Both of them were loyal to the Trunsoist Empire, the angel family of the Fourth Epoch, and they were the final winners. However, Loans Augustus and Phaenopotter's Castilla families also meet the same conditions. Oh right, the Sauron and Einhorn family have one more thing in common, and that is their possession of the Hunter pathway. Is this the reason for them being chosen? Taking the situation from before into context, the Hunter pathway is equal to the Red Priest pathway? As he made a guess, Klein didn't conceal his doubts. I know about the Sauron and Einhorn families, but I've never heard of the Medici family. Very normal. They often enjoy hiding in the shadows. They are corrupted angels and have established an extremely secretive organization. The evil spirit said with a contemptuous tone. That organization is known as Rose Redemption. This name is very familiar. That's right. Inside the abandoned temple of the true creator that was recently found by the City of Silver, there is something similar written on a corner of a mural. They suspect that it's the name of the city or the creator of the temple. Now, from the looks of it, this symbolizes an extremely secretive organization that was founded by corrupted angels. They believe in the true creator? What is their relationship with the Aurora Order? Klein pondered for a moment and said, "It's related to the true creator?" The evil spirit was silent for 2 seconds before asking in a low voice, "You know about Rose Redemption?" "I heard it by chance." Klein spoke the absolute truth. The evil spirit thought for a moment, then it suddenly said with a smile, "You have more secrets than I thought. Can we not talk about such things?" Klein held himself back from watching Sharon's response, as he wore an unperturbed look. The evil spirit's gaze swept across the two and laughed. Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true creator. It's impossible for you to imagine that certain people were once members of Rose Redemption, but they have since left it. As long as you find an organization that believes in the true creator and trace it to the very end, then there will be a chance of you coming into contact with Rose Redemption. It sounds a little like the Twilight Hermit Order, with one being the front side while the other the back side. Klein made an intuitive guess. Seeing that the evil spirit had no intention of giving an in-depth introduction to Rose Redemption, he laughed and said, "Do you think we can complete something like that with our strengths?" The evil spirit was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Maybe you guys can try your luck in Beanshy Town." Beanshy Town? Where's that? Despite Klein's repeated questioning, the evil spirit refused to reveal anything else. Faced with this situation, Klein could only switch to asking, during the Fourth Epoch, were the Dark Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor fighting for the position of Sequence 0? When the evil spirit heard this, it was stunned for a moment before it smiled and said, "It was the case, but not later. It wasn't the case after Alistair Tudor went mad." Alista Tudor was that blood emperor? Klein sought confirmation. The evil spirit nodded. Yes, there has only been one blood emperor, that lunatic Alista Tudor. Heh. The descendants of the Tudor family have all inherited the madness of that bloodline. They're usually crafty, devious, careful, and cautious, but at critical moments, they can become reckless and not consider the repercussions. The evil spirit pointed at Rafter Pound's face and said, "He is an example. However, after this lesson, he will definitely become more normal for a long period of time. I've no idea if he's the last Tudor. Alista left quite a number of good things which require the blood of his descendants in order to gain access to them. It's best that you don't kill him now." The evil spirit paused and chuckled softly. "All right, after you help me remove the seal, I will tell you all the stories I have experienced. No, a more accurate description is the history I've experienced." Having said that, Rafter Pound's eyes suddenly lost focus. His body twitched a few times before limply collapsing to the ground. Sharon silently watched this scene before she suddenly took a step forward. Whoosh! The wind howled as the dirt and rocks on the ground began to move before falling into the underground tunnel and sealing off the entrance. After that was done, Klein and Sharon left William Street and took a detour to another block in the silent darkness. When Klein boarded the rental carriage, Sharon's figure appeared, and she sat across from him. She looked unblinkingly at Klein as she asked with her hoarse and ethereal voice, "Will you help it lift its seal?" "No." Klein didn't hesitate to reply, and then he asked, "What about you?" Sharon shook her head, indicating that she wouldn't either. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he smiled. "It's already been dead for about 2,000 years, and right now, it's just a remnant of an evil spirit. Dispersing or returning to the spirit world is supposed to be its end. My plan is that once we become high-sequence Beyonders, we can team up and eliminate it, giving it true deliverance." Although the Red Priest card, the hidden history of the fourth epoch, and the evil spirit's promised rewards were tempting, Klein had no confidence in it at all. In his mind, he would always recall the scene of the evil spirit's corpse sitting on a high-backed chair with its head lowered. He would also remember how the other party's face would be covered in traces of decay when he raised his head. Sharon tersely acknowledged, giving the necessary response. "Aren't you supposed to ask me why I'm so confident in becoming a high-sequence Beyonder?" Klein couldn't help but lampoon. And the answer to that question was that people needed to have dreams. Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "Is the race corresponding sequence 4 really puppet?" Sharon nodded. "Do you have the potion formula or Beyonder ingredients?" Klein asked in thought. Sharon shook her head. Klein let out a soft chuckle. "I'll help you keep an eye out for it in my circle." Without changing her tone, Sharon said without changing her tone, "Thank you." Klein looked out of the window and muttered to himself, "I'm going to the south for a holiday." At this point he said with a smile, as if he were speaking to a lawyer, "Jürgen, let me wish you and Merrick a happy new year in advance." Sharon was silent for 2 seconds. Then she pursed her lips and replied in a fleeting voice, "Happy New Year." Her figure gradually faded and disappeared from the carriage. Looking at the little boy behind the altar, and hearing his slightly hoarse and tender voice, Derek felt as if he was facing the most terrifying monster. He almost performed a downward cleave with the axe of Hurricane in his hand. From what he knew, a person who could survive in the pure darkness for so long was definitely not human. Even if he was one before, it definitely wouldn't be one after that long. Demon Hunter Colin's eyes seemed to brighten a little. He tightened his grip on his sword and asked in a calm voice, "What are you doing here?" The yellow-haired boy who called himself Jack had a pained expression as he replied, "We're looking for the holy residence of the Lord." "The holy residence of the Lord?" Colin pressed. "Right." The little boy Jack turned his head and looked at the pitch-black cross and the statue of the overturned man. "They told me that as long as I go in the direction that the Lord's eyes look in, then I will be able to reach his holy residence." "They? You still have companions?" Colin's eyes moved one full revolution, as if he were a monster, taking in the surroundings. "Where are they?" Hearing this question, the little boy Jack was stunned for a moment. Suddenly he held his throat, and with a twisted blank look on his face he said, I'm so hungry. So hungry. Chapter 458. An ancient sanguine so hungry. Amidst his trance-like words, Jack raised his head and looked at Joshua, who was wearing a pair of scarlet-red gloves. So hungry. His mouth opened in an instant, reaching straight to his ears, revealing his neat white teeth and thick saliva that was constantly gushing out of his mouth. At the same time, he threw himself forward towards Joshua. He was so fast that he left behind an afterimage on the ground. Although Joshua was on high alert, he wasn't able to react in time. Before he could even make out what was happening, the little boy Jack had already pounced in front of him. Thump! The yellow-haired figure seemed to slam into an invisible wall, stopping only a step away from Joshua. Jack suspended himself in midair as a reddish glow from the darkness emerged from his body and started to corrode the transparent barrier that was denying him entry. Behind Joshua and Derek, Demon Hunter Colin had already fallen to one knee at some point. He had stabbed his sword, smeared with a silver ointment, into the ground. Soon after, the area around the altar instantly brightened, as if it was the purest ray of the light of dawn. Colin suddenly drew his sword, and his figure strangely split apart, turning into a series of afterimages that spread out around the altar. Every single figure raised the sword in their hands at the same time, and, combined with the light of dawn in the vicinity, released a bright glow. So. One sword after another was thrust forward as the light of dawn converged towards Jack from all directions, encircling him in the middle. Under the brilliance of the rising sun, the black and red figures quickly evaporated, disappearing under the storm-like barrage of attacks. In the underground hall where the altar was located, the brilliance became abnormally bright, so bright that Derek Berg couldn't help but close his eyes. With a sudden jolt, he suddenly woke up from his slumber and saw a bonfire quietly burning in front of him and his teammates, who were diligently guarding the camp. Demon Hunter Colin, who was sitting cross-legged beside a stone pillar, opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." Upon hearing this, Derek looked up at the sky and found that the frequency of lightning hadn't significantly increased. Darkness remained the ruler of this land. When he thought of the city he was about to arrive at, and the temple of the fallen creator, he couldn't help but feel slightly nervous. After spending some time calming himself down, Derek quickly ate his food and recovered his combat-ready state. I wonder what will happen in that temple. Holding the axe of Hurricane, he came to the middle of the group. Within the campsite, lanterns that were covered with a thin layer of animal hide were being lit one after another. 15 Minsk Street. Klein heated the water, adjusted the temperature, and took a comfortable bath. With the languidness after a bath, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He intended to use divination to make a confirmation about the evil spirit's matter. In the silence of the ancient palace, Klein leaned back in his chair and began to seriously consider which divination method to choose and how to design the divination statement. It had to conform to the principles of mysticism. It shouldn't involve subdivision or elimination, and it had to contain sufficient information. After a short period of silence, Klein leaned forward and wrote down what he wanted to confirm. The evil spirit in the ruins harbors strong malice towards Sharon and me. He undid the spirit pendulum on his left wrist, gripped it with one hand, and began entering cogitation. After muttering to himself for a while, he opened his eyes and looked forward. This time, the topaz pendant was wildly rotating clockwise. This meant that the evil spirit's malice was stronger than Klein had imagined. At that time, there was nothing abnormal about the spiritual intuition we had. That evil spirit is also a powerhouse that's good at interfering with divination and prophecy. Haha, he definitely wouldn't have imagined that one of us has the temperance to resist desire, preventing her from being blinded by greed, while the other has experienced too many things to know what it means to ask a tiger for its skin. With a sigh, Klein returned to the real world and laid down on his bed. Unfortunately, the heat brought by the sun brooch is only a psychological feeling and can't warm the bed. Before he fell asleep, he closed his eyes and thought with regret. South of the bridge, Rose Street, Harvest Church. After Emlyn White wiped the last chair, he straightened up and eagerly said to Father Yutravsky, "I've finished doing today's chores." "Damn, old man. Don't you suddenly get ideas of getting me to copy the Holy Bible?" Emlyn prayed inwardly. The object of his prayer had unwittingly changed from the moon to Earth Mother. Father Yutravsky stood there, making the vampire look like a child. He smiled and said, "Recently, you've been able to experience the joy and relaxation of working with dedication and gratitude. Go back and quietly feel the pulse of life and the pure joy that comes from it." "I haven't," Emlyn denied on reflex. Without saying anything, Father Yutravsky looked at him with a kind smile, turned and took a seat, and then began his nightly prayer. Emlyn White's lips quivered as he wanted to refute, but in the end he failed to say anything. He silently left the Harvest Church and habitually closed the door. When he returned to his current residence, he found that the house was empty. Both his parents had disappeared without a trace. It was only after witnessing this scene that he remembered that there was going to be a sanguine gathering in the Backland area tonight. Those fellows are really disgraceful. As noble sanguine, they should sleep in coffins or stay in their own rooms. Why are they mimicking humans and holding all kinds of gatherings? There's even dancing. Emlyn muttered contemptuously. As he spoke, he touched his belly and swallowed a mouthful of saliva before deciding to change into some clothes to attend the gathering. The Odora family sure is enviable. They actually have a pure human partner who runs several hospitals and has fresh blood every day. They can drink as much as they want anytime they want. Emlyn put on his black top hat and quickly walked out of the house. Westboro in a brightly lit villa. Emlyn picked up a glass with scarlet liquid and hungrily took a gulp of it. It really has been pre-selected. He half closed his eyes, sighing in praise from the bottom of his heart. At this moment on the dance floor, handsome men and beautiful women were dancing, twirling and taking slow steps with each other under the romantic music. What's the point of all of this? Emlyn stood at the edge of the railing on the second floor, looking down at his kinsman. As the largest city in the world, Backland had many vampires living in it. They hid in all walks of life and had completely integrated into human society. As for those who were unable to control their own destructive urges and bloodlust, they were either sent to castles deep in the mountains or were dealt with in advance to prevent the Nighthawks or other official Beyonder organizations from finding clues. As he looked at his fellow kinsmen, who were growing more spirited as the night went on, Emlyn increasingly felt like there was nothing in common between him and them. At that moment, the host of the banquet tonight, Cosme Odora, walked over with a wine cup in hand. Smiling, he asked, "Do you like tonight's wine?" "Of course, its owner is young enough and possesses great vitality." Emlyn straightened his back and assumed a noble posture. Based on appearances, Cosme Odora was a very gracious middle-aged gentleman, but Emlyn knew that he was over 200 years old. He had once seen Intis under the rule of Emperor Roselle, and then he moved to Lone because he had lived for too long and feared that his neighbors would discover something was wrong about him. Upon hearing Emlyn's praise, he smiled and said, "Yes, its owner is a young lady who was stabbed by a thief and nearly lost her life. Fortunately, she met me, and this is the price she needs to pay for her recovery. You can have a taste of the wine over there, as well as the wine over there. The owners are from Balam and Fainapotter respectively. They have different flavors." "Fainapotter? Mother Goddess. The humans there love chili so much that their blood has a spiciness that I can't stand." "Mother Goddess." As he spoke, Emlyn suddenly paused, his expression instantly turning blank. The corner of Cosme's mouth twitched, and he pretended not to hear anything. In the awkward silence, he cleared his throat and said, "Emlyn, that's just your imagination. By the way, my grandfather wishes to meet you." "Your grandfather?" Emlyn was startled for a moment, but he then immediately widened his eyes. "Lord Nibs." Nibs Odora was a powerful sanguine who had been active in the Fourth Epoch, but the times had corroded his life and forced him to lie in a cold coffin for extended periods of time. Cosme nodded solemnly. "Yes." With that, he turned and walked to another staircase on the second floor, not considering the possibility that Emlyn might refuse him. Emlyn followed, a little nervous and uneasy, thinking about the purpose of Lord Nibs's summons. Has he finally understood that the honor of the Sanguine is more important, and has decided to help me get rid of Father Yutravsky's psychological cue? As he walked, Emlyn White developed a strong sense of hope. Following the stairs to the underground area, Emlyn White passed through a few secret doors and entered a large gray hall. In the center of the hall was a heavy coffin made of black iron, engraved with symbols and magic labels. After Cosmiodora reported Emlyn's arrival, a heavy and aged voice slowly came out from the coffin. Emlyn White, do you know why I summoned you? Honorable Lord Nibs, I imagine that you are planning on helping me remove the psychological cue. Emlyn responded without hesitation. Silence reigned in the underground hall for a few seconds. Then Nibs-Odora, who was lying in the coffin, chuckled and said, That's one of the purposes, but it won't be me helping you. I just woke up from a long dream, because I received a revelation from the ancestor. Ancestor? She has awakened. It wasn't Emlyn who exclaimed in surprise, but Cosmiodora. After the cataclysm, doesn't the ancestor only respond to important matters? Emlyn listened in bewilderment. No, not yet, Nibs said in a heavy voice. The ancestor told me that the apocalypse is near, and that we must prepare for it. And you, Emlyn White, are one of the key elements in the ancestor's revelation. Apocalypse? Cosmi asked in surprise. But Emlyn only had one thought. I, Emlyn White, was actually mentioned by the ancestor. I am a key element for the sanguine survival of the apocalypse. Nibs ignored his grandson's question and continued. Emlyn White, I'll hand you a task right now. Please speak. Emlyn felt that he was being too modest. Even after hearing what had just been said, he didn't show any arrogance in front of Lord Nibs. Nibs-Odora solemnly said, Find a chance to pray to the fool. Ah, Emlyn suspected he had heard wrongly. Nibs lowered his voice and added, The fool whose honorific name has only recently been spread. Chapter 459. Letting a chance slip. Although I have always had the urge to pray to the fool to get rid of the psychological cue that Father Yutravsky gave me, I also know, very clearly, that it's dangerous to recite the honorific name of an unknown being. Not all hidden existences will start with bait and slowly provide guidance. In such matters, they are often like sharks in the sea, who would go mad and lurch forward once they smell blood. But now, Lord Nibs, no, what does the ancestor want? Emlyn White said, finding it rather ridiculous. It will be very, very, very dangerous. Inside the black iron coffin, Nibs-Odora replied with an aged voice. Yes, under normal circumstances. But not all hidden existences are filled with malice. Among them, they will similarly abide to rules and enjoy transactions. For example, the 7 pure lights of the spirit world. Since the ancestor has given such a revelation, it means that the danger that the fool can bring is not too serious, or even none. And during this entire process, I will always be by your side to protect you. Don't you want to get rid of the psychological cue? Have you already become a believer of Earth Mother and abandoned the moon? No, I haven't, Emlyn frantically denied. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, I wish to have a few days to think it over. All right, no problem. I believe that you will make a choice that suits your noble identity as a member of the Sanguine. Inside the coffin, Nibs's voice turned soft as he smiled and comforted him. After sending Emlyn White back to the second floor, Cosmiodora once again returned to the dark and gloomy underground hall, and he asked with confusion and doubt, Grandfather, how could the revelation given by the ancestor involve Emlyn White? He's just a weak member of the Sanguine who only recently reached adulthood. Nibs's voice came through the thick black metal coffin lid and reverberated in the air. No, the revelation provided by the ancestor never included Emlyn White. She only showed a scene of the dawn of the apocalypse, depicting the erosion of the crimson moon, as well as mentioning the fool and the corresponding honorific name. During this process, no Sanguine appeared. The mention of the key element was just my way of convincing Emlyn White. However, being able to take risks for the future of the Sanguine can also be considered a key element. Cosme was first enlightened, before he had another question. Why did you choose Emlyn White? What's so special about him? Nibs Odora suddenly laughed. Hasn't he been clamoring about praying to the fool all this time? Didn't he think that we weren't putting too much weight on his problem? That we aren't willing to antagonize Bishop Utravsky? So he was trying to find other help? I'm just fulfilling his wish. For a long time, Cosme was speechless. Emlyn White stood at the railing of the second floor, looked down at his tireless kinsman, and nervously took a sip of his wine. Up to this day, I haven't heard of any terrible outcome for people who prayed to the fool. Perhaps it's just as Lord Nibs said. The fool is just like the 7 pure lights in the spirit world, a hidden existence that maintains order and is warm-hearted. Wait a minute. What are the 7 pure lights in the spirit world? Why haven't I ever heard of them before? They seem to be on the side of good. I wonder if this will be any help to me. In short, the fool isn't necessarily dangerous, and there is Lord Nibs protecting me. Maybe I can take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the psychological cue. Emlyn consoled himself with fear and anticipation. Monday morning, Chowood Borough 15 Minsk Street. Klein squatted in front of the toilet, holding a brush and carefully cleaning the dirt inside it. According to his schedule, after completing his visits on Saturday and Sunday, he decided to take a day off and wait until tomorrow to report back to Prince Edisak about the final results and hand over the assignment. But during what should have been his relaxation time, he found the house a little too messy and dirty. It was only when he saw this that he remembered that the cleaning of the house had been done twice a week through the temporary employment of the landlady's maid next door. As the Sammers had gone on holiday to Seville City and Desi Bay, one of the maids had gone along with them, while another had returned to the countryside after receiving a year-end bonus. 15 Minsk Street, where he lived, hadn't been cleaned by anyone for quite some time. Klein had planned to put up with it for 2 days since he was leaving Backlund, but in his free time, he didn't dare to take the time to head to the Quelag Club to have fun. He was afraid of infuriating Prince Edisak, so he could only stay home. Hence, seeing the things that irked him, he changed into his old clothes and began spring cleaning before the new year. He went on to scrub the toilet, wash the bathtub, wipe the windows, mop the floors, clean his equipment and wash clothes. Klein busied himself from 8 to 11 before barely completing his desired cleanup. Of course, he only did it perfunctorily without that much attention to detail. Sometimes, renting too big a house isn't a good thing. Klein washed his hands and wiped his face with a towel. Walking out of the bathroom and looking at the clean and tidy living room and dining room, and watching the sunlight pierce through the clouds and shine through the transparent glass window, showering golden spots in his house, he had a strange sense of accomplishment. He felt a lot happier. Time to reward myself for lunch. I'll find a good restaurant. Klein returned to the second floor and changed his clothes. As he leafed through the papers, waiting for lunchtime, the doorbell rang. It's almost the new year, and there are still people coming to entrust me with missions? As he rose and walked to the door, Klein made up his mind to decline. Although he only had £34 left in cash, in order to get out of the royal strife, he had to go on vacation to the south as soon as possible. He could no longer accept assignments. To his surprise, the visitor wasn't a stranger, but the old butler of Prince Edisak. The old butler was wearing a well-cut tuxedo. He saluted without losing his dignity, and said, "Detective Moriarty, His Highness, the Prince, is waiting for you in the carriage at the end of the street. He wishes to know the progress of your investigations." So impatient. All right, that saves me the trouble of going all the way to Red Rose Manor tomorrow. Klein quickly reorganized what he had thought of last night and calmly replied, "All right." He was about to remove his hat from the coat rack when he felt a sudden ache in his stomach, a pain that required him to visit the toilet. After enduring for a while, he realized that he couldn't hold it in any longer, and apologetically said to the old butler, "I'm very sorry. I'll need to use the bathroom first. My stomach isn't feeling well." The old butler didn't show any abnormal expression. "That's your freedom." As he discharged one wave after another of bliss, clearing away the remnants in his stomach, Klein washed his hands and returned to the hall. At that moment, he noticed that the old butler was no longer around. The one waiting outside was the maid with curly brown hair. His Highness requested me to apologize to you. He still has matters to attend to and cannot wait for too long. Please go to Red Rose Manor tomorrow, or the afternoon of the day after tomorrow. The maid bowed meticulously. It hasn't even been 10 minutes, and I'd already done it as fast as I could. Usually, I can continue on for quite a while if I have newspapers. Klein smiled. No problem. After receiving a response, the maid who had completed her mission immediately felt a weight off her chest. She giggled and said, Detective Moriarty, you missed that lady again. Huh? Klein was at a loss. The maid lowered her voice and said, This time the young lady came with His Highness. She was the one who suggested taking a detour to meet you. In the end, I missed her because of my stomachache? Something isn't right. Klein frowned slightly. In a room padded with a thick and soft carpet, a quill that was being held came to a pause and stopped writing. In the open notebook beneath it, there were lines of text and marks of scribbled-out text. Scribbles. Target attempted to escape control. But unfortunately, Detective Sherlock Moriarty leaves before she heads downstairs. The target influenced the surrounding maids, but Prince Edisac's butler, Funkel, chanced upon the problem and dealt with it. Scribbles. The target went off track once again. She participated in Talam's funeral on behalf of Prince Edisac. However, having quickly recovered to her normal state, she realized that she was unable to identify Sherlock Moriarty, and she could only let a chance slip. Sherlock Moriarty went to Red Rose Manor to investigate, but the timing wasn't right, and the target happened to be riding horses on the golf course. Scribbles. The target once again triumphed over the arrangement, encouraging Prince Edisac to visit Detective Sherlock Moriarty. Unfortunately, Sherlock Moriarty happened to have a stomachache, ended up staying in the bathroom for 7 minutes and 45 seconds, and the prince couldn't afford to wait. His facial features were like a sculpture, but the middle-aged man who was blinded in one eye put down his quill and looked at a woman. What exactly did you put on her body? Breaking through the restrictions time and time again will create big problems. The woman laughed in a low voice and said, It was just an accident. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. As she spoke, she pulled back her hair, revealing her long white neck. After that, she slowly applied various things to her face, making her look even more alluring. Seeing that she was putting on her clothes and accessories, the dark golden-haired middle-aged man frowned and asked, Where are you going? The woman didn't directly answer and said with a smile, Be careful of the quill in your hand. You almost exchanged bodies with someone the last time. You don't need to remind me. The middle-aged man with deep blue eyes to the point of being black said with a straight face. The woman tightened her belt to make herself look thinner. Then she lazily stretched and yawned while covering her mouth. I'm going to pay a visit to Mr. A of the Aurora Order. I hope he's as crazy as the rumors say. As she spoke, the expression of the blind middle-aged man suddenly sank. It was because that ordinary quill had begun to write on its own, as though an invisible hand was holding on to it. Chapter 460. Cyclic explorations above the gray fog. The ancient temple-like building stood quietly. After noticing some abnormalities in the series of coincidences, Klein entered the mysterious space after lunch, in an attempt to confirm a guess in his mind. He picked up a fountain pen he conjured, paused for 2 seconds, and then wrote, I am involved in a series of coincidences created by sealed artifact 0-08. Putting down the dark red pen, Klein held the silver chain in his left hand and began his divination. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at the spirit pendulum, just inches away from him. The topaz pendant stood still without any rotations. This meant that the divination had failed. Divination cannot be completed, possibly due to not fulfilling sufficient conditions, or it could be because 0-08 is resisting it. In both cases, a similar result would occur. Klein changed his statement and tried to direct it at different targets, but all of them failed. He tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his finger, hesitating on whether he should go to Red Rose Manor the day after tomorrow. If there's no 0-08 or a similar power to arrange these matters, then my sudden escape will definitely raise Prince Edisac's suspicion. No, my escape might not be successful. Prince Edisac's men live next door. Of course, since I'm already a faceless, it's easy for me to find a chance to escape when I'm out. But is there a need to go this far? Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be able to leave Backland without attracting too much attention by honestly seeking an audience with Prince Edisac and normally handing over the mission. His Highness will likely not force me, an unaffiliated Beyonder, to accomplish too difficult a task. If there really is a sealed artifact or demigod like 0-08 influencing the recent events, then from my past experience, I should just be a side character who mistakenly entered the stage and haven't received enough attention. In this case, escaping is tantamount to telling the other party that I have detected your presence. I'm highly problematic. In this way, relying on my faceless powers wouldn't necessarily allow me to escape the attention that has locked onto me. The best method would be to calmly go to the Red Rose Manor and go through the normal procedures to exit the stage. After graciously bowing from the curtain call, I'll fade away from the attention of the unknown party. After combining the two elements, Klein finally decided to pretend that he hadn't discovered anything and to leave Backland according to plan. The bonfire in the campsite was burning with flames, and there was someone standing guard inside the campsite the entire time. Derek Berg leaned against a stone pillar and slept to recover his strength. At this moment, he was dreaming of the endless grayish-white fog, an ancient chair situated at the highest point in the center, as well as the indifferent figure sitting on that chair, overlooking everything. Mr. Fool, Derek said the name in a chanting manner in his mind. Following that, he heard the fool's voice. Prepare for the gathering. Yes, Mr. Fool, Derek answered silently, and began counting his heartbeats. His eyes never opened, as if everything that had just happened was just a prelude to a dream. There's still quite a bit of time before we set off. There's enough time to attend the tarot gathering, he thought with relief. He originally imagined that he, who had joined the exploratory team, would miss this gathering. After 1,000 heartbeats, Derek waited a little longer before he felt himself entering that quiet and serene divine hall. The moment he opened his eyes, scenes flashed through his mind. It was as if an external force had instantly injected all his lost memories into his head once again. The scenes were crumbling city walls, buildings crisscrossed with white and blue, the temple of the fallen creator with a similar architectural style as the city of silver, murals detailing the approaching apocalypse and the fallen creator's protection of the remaining humans from the 6 great evil gods, the beautiful and dangerous mushrooms, and Jack, the eerie pale yellow-haired boy of unknown origins. These kinds of scenes had repeated over and over again for a total of 5 times. But each time there was a slight difference in the details. The first time, outside the fallen creator's temple, all of the animal hide lanterns had been extinguished, nearly causing a tragedy. The second time, someone lost control of themselves and almost swallowed a mushroom. Fortunately, Chief Collins stopped them in time. The third time, the little boy Jack told a story, which was that he and his father had been searching for the creator's holy residence in the endless ocean, and they ended up encountering a huge storm. The fourth time, Joshua was severely injured by Jack, who had mutated without any warning. The fifth time, the temple completely collapsed, blocking the exit of the underground area. And all of these occurrences ended with Demon Hunter Colin killing the little boy Jack, and then started off with their rest in the camp, preparing to enter the ruined city. The beginning and end were connected as it repeated in a cycle. We've explored the temple 5 times. We have been living through this experience all this time, and there is no way to truly end it. The more Derek understood his sudden new memories, the more frightened and terrified he became. Audrey, who was sitting on the other side of the long bronze table, originally wanted to greet Mr. Fool and the others with a cheerful and light voice as usual. However, when she glanced over, she immediately noticed that little son's mood wasn't right. She immediately asked, "Mr. Son, did something happen? Has the exploration of the true, fallen creator's temple not gone smoothly? Derek seemed to have grabbed onto hope as he hurriedly described the rough situation once. When he was done, he said, "After that little boy was dealt with by His Excellency, we all closed our eyes and woke up in the campsite outside the city in preparation to begin a brand new exploration. We no longer had any memories from before. This process has been repeated 5 times, with only the details being slightly different. If it wasn't for Mr. Fool's alerting me to this, then I wouldn't have even known that I've been living a recurring life all this time." He took it for granted that the extra memories from his arrival above the gray fog were the result of Mr. Fool's reminder. He stood up and gave a solemn salute to the blurry figure seated at the head of the long bronze table. "I only understood the situation after listening to your description." Klein was still in a daze. He maintained his original posture and lightly nodded his head in response. In a situation where the reasons are unknown, a superior wouldn't so easily express his opinion, so I can't rashly open my mouth. Klein secretly reviewed what he had learned from his past life as a keyboard warrior. Seeing that Mr. Fool seemed to be an imperturbable ancient wall, Derek felt a lot more at ease and felt that the matter could finally be resolved. He turned to look at the hanged man, the world, justice, and the magician, and he sincerely asked, "Do you know the root of the problem? How can this be resolved?" The zealous Audrey instinctively wanted to answer, but she found herself without a clue or even a guess. Furs was in a similar state as she was, filled with rich knowledge from Earth, and having read many novels of being stuck in the same day. Klein originally wanted to control the world to give out ideas to give everyone some inspiration to consider regarding the matter, but after thinking about it carefully, he chose to stay low-key and prepared to observe first. After listening to the son's description, Alger remained silent for a long time. At this moment he said in a measured tone, "I can only think of 2 possibilities. First, you have encountered a nightmare or hallucinatory power at a level that exceeds a demigod. After regaining your memories with Mr. Fool's help, you should be able to immediately detect something amiss once you return to the real world. That way, the problem will easily be resolved. Second, you were forced to or you proactively entered a strange space or state at a particular node where time is controlled to flow in a certain manner, but the time is fixed within a certain range which is cyclical, and the continuation is balanced. That is to say, it is relatively static. In this situation, there aren't many ways to end the cycle. Either there is an external force that can forcefully break the balance, or you find the key point that connects the distortion of time. An external force that can forcefully break the balance? Upon hearing this, Audrey, Furs, and Derek all subconsciously glanced at the calm and leisurely Mr. Fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table. No, I can't always seek Mr. Fool's help. By not saying anything directly, he probably wishes to test my ability at dealing with such matters. After a moment of thought he said, "Mr. Hanged Man, let's assume the second situation. In your opinion, what do you think is the key point that connects the distortion of time?" Without waiting for the hanged man to respond, Audrey guessed with interest, "That little boy Jack? You can't kill him when you're facing him?" Alger nodded. "That's a possibility." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "The son's description of Jack and his father reminds me of a particular incident." He turned to look at Miss Justice. "Didn't I once mention that I was pursuing a listener of the Aurora Order at sea? The goal for his voyage was to seek the true creator's holy residence." Audrey carefully recalled and said without any strong confirmation, "That seems to be the case." Alger immediately said with a deep voice, "That listener also brought his son, and the son's age is very close to the son's description of Jack." "Are you saying that Jack went from your world to the vicinity of the City of Silver?" Derek asked, stunned. After a short period of settling down, he inwardly felt an indescribable sense of happiness. This means that the City of Silver hasn't been completely sealed off yet. There's still a chance to connect with the normal world, where the Hanged Man and Justice are from. I can only say that it is possible. The Hanged Man couldn't give an affirmative answer. He thought for a moment and suggested, "You can find a chance to bring up the Sonia Sea, the Lone Kingdom, and the port city in front of Jack. Perhaps there will be a different reaction, But of course, try to avoid doing so in front of the chief of your city of silver as much as possible. Also, the key point doesn't necessarily lie with Jack. We have to consider other possibilities as well. You should tell us the specifics, such as the details of the mural, and maybe we can find something useful. At this point, Alger began to look forward to receiving information. Chapter 461. The kind and enthusiastic hanged man. Unlike the past, Derek was clearly smarter. He didn't clumsily rely only on words to provide a description. After receiving Mr. Fool's permission, he conjured a series of scenes from the memories that he could recall. He showed the exploratory process and the points he found important to the hanged man, justice, the magician, and the world in a fragmented fashion, and then he included some explanations for them. The walls that had collapsed in the darkness, the streets that passed through the destroyed buildings, the stone pillar-propped white and blue ancient temple that was covered in dust under the light of the animal hide lantern, the statue that hung upside down from a pitch-black cross, the series of murals depicting the fallen creator who suffered from the sin in place of humanity, the exceptionally alluring mushrooms, the statue at the altar that had strangely opened its eyes, and the young, yellow-haired Jack who had been hiding in the back. All these scenes took shape and were reflected in the eyes of the Tarot Club members in the most direct and realistic manner. The gloomy and dark tone, the sense of crisis with every step that was taken, and the bizarre development that the son was experiencing made Audrey rather excited. She became extremely interested in what he was saying. This is the situation around the City of Silver. It's more attractive than any novel I've ever read. This is the charm of mystery, uncertainty, and terror combined. Of course, to the humans who live there, this isn't a good thing. Audrey's thoughts were in disarray. She wanted nothing more than to immediately become a powerhouse, at the level of a demigod, and venture into that region ruled by darkness and storms. Klein watched and sighed emotionally. He was sighing because it truly wasn't easy for the City of Silver to last all this time in such an environment. He sighed because little son still wasn't smart enough and had no experience. Otherwise, he would have been able to completely present the events that happened in the form of a movie or documentary. It would certainly be exciting and attractive. However, this way the description would take too long. My spirituality wouldn't be able to endure if everyone were to watch such a movie. Also, the longer one stays above the gray fog, the more likely it is that something bad will happen in the outside world. Klein suddenly felt lucky. Alger finished watching in silence as he thought over it. He got the son to pick a few important points he had chosen to present them above the long bronze table. Among them included the mural of the fallen creator resisting the 6 evil gods. Which evil gods are these? Alger looked at the octopus with lightning wrapped around its body, black waves at its feet, an avian feathered cloak on its back, and a 3-pronged trident in its hand as he began to make connections. Derek shook his head honestly. I don't know. I thought you would know them. Audrey and Furs cast their gazes over at the same time, carefully observing them several times, but they still failed to come up with any guesses. They had originally thought that these were 6 of the 8 ancient gods from the legends of the City of Silver, but they couldn't find a suitable match. After all, there was a dragon, an elf, a giant, a phoenix, and an annihilation demonic wolf, while there was only one giant in the mural. The fool took a serious look, and his pupils nearly contracted. In consideration of his standing, he had only taken a cursory look at the mural in the beginning. But now, he finally realized that something was wrong. This is very similar to the statues of the 6 gods, which I saw in the Tudor family's underground ruin, except that one is a normal version, and the other is a corrupted version. It really is a bit hard for people to look at it directly, especially Earth Mother, Lord of Storms, and Eternal Blazing Sunday. Not only have they been sullied as evil gods, but they're even akin to ugly monsters. Klein didn't feel a sense of sudden enlightenment from having realized the truth. He had expected the true creator to disparage the 6 gods and distort their images. However, I can't completely ignore the possibility of this mural appearing. Just like how I had always thought that the Orthodox gods didn't have a human form, with only symbols left. As a result, The statues in the ruins of the Tudor family have made me less certain. It seems like the establishment of the images of the gods have undergone a long evolution, and many secrets are hidden within. Klein was relieved when he saw that Miss Justice was focusing on examining the mural and didn't pay attention to Mr. Fool's attitude, because it involved whether or not little son could get out of the strange predicament of repeating that short period of life. He decided to tell them what he knew. Of course, the long introduction and display of the images of the 6 gods inside the underground ruin didn't fit the identity of the fool. He intended to control the world to complete this task. And this was in line with his goal of making the world and Sherlock Moriarty equivalent. The fool should enigmatically say, "Evernight Sun Storm Wisdom Earth Giant," and then give no explanation, with superfluous descriptions. Klein thought for 2 seconds and let the world say in a hoarse voice, "I've seen similar statues." After attracting everyone's gaze, he paused and added, "In an adventure to a 4th epoch ruin." Audrey was very interested, but she maintained her basic level of restraint. "Mr. World, what kind of statues were there? Can you show it to us?" "Of course, if you aren't willing to. Or if you require compensation, it's negotiable." "There's no need, as this might also solve some of my doubts." The world smiled darkly. He acted by making a request to Mr. Fool, and when he got permission, he conjured the statues of the 6 gods and their corresponding sacred emblems. With her head against the full moon, the lady, who wore layers upon layers of hazy dresses that didn't repeat, gave off an exceptionally beautiful feeling. On her long black skirt, there were also specks of starlight, as if it were a night sky, and on top of that iconic Evernight sacred emblem. Audrey immediately recognized her to be the Evernight goddess she worshipped. This statue was most similar to the evil god in the upper left corner of the mural, but its face was more human, and there were no strange eyes hidden around it. What sacrilege! This is sacrilegious to the goddess. Audrey was a little angry, but she quickly calmed down. As the most infamous evil god, it's expected that the true creator would let his followers disfigure the goddess. But why would there be a humanoid sculpture of the goddess in the underground ruins? Isn't it said that the Orthodox gods only have symbols? Audrey frowned slightly, lost in thought. Alger felt somewhat enlightened as he said with a sigh, "So the murals depict the distorted images of the 6 gods. They really had humanoid images in the past. Perhaps this is the reason why the churches have always been trying to find the forsaken land of the gods. As for the forsaken land of the gods, it's most likely hidden in the depths of the Sonia Sea. Yes, it definitely doesn't exist in a normal state. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the deities to not notice it." Alger added silently inwardly. The son was first taken aback, before he came to a realization. "Mr. Hanged Man, are these the deities that all of you mentioned before? The Evernight goddess, the Lord of Storms?" "Yes." The Hanged Man gave an affirmative answer. "What do they have to do with the apocalypse? What does it have to do with our land being forsaken by the Lord?" Derek subconsciously pressed. Unfortunately, no one could answer him. Furs raised her hand in confusion. Why is there no god of steam and machinery? This was the god she believed in. In the northern and southern continents, the 7 gods had always been equal. Rumor has it that the god of steam and machinery, also known as the god of craftsmanship, wasn't born until the 4th epoch. From the looks of it, it's true, and the time node at which he was born seems to be in the late 4th epoch, not in the early or mid-4th epoch, the Hanged Man said. A mixture of explanations and guesses. He had an unconcealable enthusiasm for such topics. So that's the case. Furs felt a little guilty as she had never read the Steam and Machinery Bible seriously, and her faith appeared as just a way of life. Derek didn't harp on the previous matter and instead asked, "Is this mural the key point? Perhaps you can try to break it, but don't let the chief suspect you." The Hanged Man was about to say that he shouldn't attempt to pronounce the honorific names of one of the 6 gods, or else he or they might directly descend into the forsaken land of the gods. But after careful consideration, he realized that the little son didn't know the corresponding honorific names at all. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. You're always so kind and enthusiastic. Also, Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Mr. World, you are similarly as kind-hearted. Derek thanked them sincerely. Kind? Enthusiastic? The hanged man was momentarily unsure of how to react. This was the first time that someone had used such words to describe him. After the discussion was over, Klein suddenly remembered something. In the previous exploration of the abandoned temple of the true creator, the City of Silver found the name Rose Redemption. However, it didn't seem to pay attention to this. It can't be ignored. According to the evil spirit in the underground ruin, this extremely secretive organization is an organization led by fallen angels, and it is in no way inferior to the Twilight Hermit Order. Perhaps the cyclic time was set up by them. Thinking of this, the fool, who was sitting upright in a high-backed chair, leisurely adjusted his posture and used his fingers to lightly tap the edge of the long mottled table. Audrey immediately turned her head and looked at Mr. Fool in excitement, waiting for him to give a hint. The hanged man, the sun, the magician, and the world also looked expectantly at Mr. Fool. Amid the fog, Klein chuckled and said, Rose Redemption. Rose Redemption? What is that? The key point to getting out of this predicament? That's right. There's such a name in the corner of a mural near the top of the temple. Derek seemed to understand something. Alger, Audrey, and Furs also recalled and gave the name Rose Redemption high importance, but they didn't fully understand the true meaning that Mr. Fool was trying to convey. Honorable Mr. Fool, what does Rose Redemption represent? Audrey raised her hand and took the initiative to ask. This time, Klein didn't respond other than giving a short laugh. His idea was very simple. The organization, the Rose Redemption, was intricately tied to the true creator. No matter what happened in the temple, it would always point to them in some way. As for whether this name was a so-called key point, Klein wasn't sure or worried. After all, he held the right to interpretation. If the sun and the others misunderstood the real meaning, how could it be Mr. Fool's fault? Chapter 462. What is a miracle? Seeing the fool chuckling silently, Audrey and the others had no choice but to withdraw their gaze and stop asking questions. In a situation like this where they were only given hints and not explanations, they didn't find it problematic. Existences at the level of deities typically had similar habits, and sometimes, what they gave weren't even hints but revelations. In the eyes of a powerful figure like Mr. Fool, just providing a single name is enough. Our failure to comprehend things is because we are lacking. We need to work harder at figuring out and attempting things. Audrey was increasingly looking forward to her future as a psychiatrist. I remember that there was something related to Rose Redemption in that semi-abandoned temple. Alger tilted his head and looked at the sun. Without any hesitation, Derek nodded and said, yes. It was text derived from Jotun in a corner of the murals. We used quite some time to decipher those words. Text derived from Jotun. Alger hadn't paid much attention to this detail before, but he couldn't help but make connections at that moment in time. That little boy Jack seems to have gone there from the Sonia Sea. Text derived from Jotun. Alger deliberated before making a request to conjure a line of text. Those words were in ancient Fasak, the origins of the northern continent's language, and they meant Rose Redemption. Derek took a closer look and was stunned. It's very close, but the way that the words end is handled differently. Mr. Hanged Man, is this a language from where you come from? As he spoke, Derek conjured the text on the mural again. Yes. Alger gave an affirmative answer. This language itself has evolved. The one you found should be of an earlier type. In the world of linguistics, this type of language, which is similar to ancient Fasak, is widely regarded as a characteristic of the Solomon Empire. Historian Klein gave the most accurate answer in his mind. Alger paused. What about the content of the corresponding mural? I wasn't in charge of that area, and I didn't take a careful look before departing. Derek instantly felt ashamed. Alger nodded without a change in expression. Find a chance to clarify this. There might be a crucial point hidden within. All right. Derek was increasingly convinced that things weren't so bad after all. Seeing that he had relaxed quite a bit, Audrey was a little curious and a little puzzled as she asked, Mr. Hanged Man, If that young boy named Jack is the child of the listener you described, why would he be able to communicate with the sun and the others? After discussing the corresponding terms for Rose redemption, she was completely certain that the City of Silver used a different language compared to the other countries in the northern and southern continent like Lone. And above the gray fog, everyone is able to communicate fluently, without any gaps in communication. It's all thanks to Mr. Fool's powers, Audrey praised in her heart. Alger scoffed as he looked at her. Miss Justice, you haven't experienced any Beyonder events, have you? Jack has already become such a terrifying monster, so what else can't he change? Trust me, there are times when language knowledge is very easy to obtain, with it taking just a second or two. Audrey blinked, feeling that she had once again exposed that she didn't have much experience or knowledge in mysticism. After this matter came to a close, the tarot gathering resumed as per the usual schedule. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table and said, Mr. Fool, this time there are 3 more Roselle diary pages. I still owe you 7. Upon hearing that, Furs hurriedly added, Mr. Fool, I also received some responses. There will be new Roselle diary pages the next time. Very well. Klein chuckled in response. By the side, Derek suddenly felt ashamed again, because he hadn't had time to visit the library last week to look through any material and memorize historical details, due to his participation in the exploratory team. After a simple process, Klein picked up the 3 diary pages which were conjured, and he began to read with great anticipation. August 8th. For the first time, I was invited to the White Maple Palace to attend a ball held by His Majesty. These aristocrats are really fucking extravagant, with the food they eat completely being in pursuit of novelty. Things like grilled swans, sheep's testicles. I have to say, I was very surprised at the beginning. The aristocrats of this world, yes, this is limited only to aristocrats, really love cleanliness. It's common for them to take baths, and toilet paper has already taken a nascent form. They totally aren't like the aristocrats of Earth's Middle Ages. I originally thought that this was an effect of the existence of true gods, but I was later informed that this was an improvement that had to be made because of some kind of threat. Beyonders of a particular sequence are able to spread the plague through dirty habits. I wonder which pathway and sequence that is. At that time, my first thought was that there's something wrong with these aristocrats' brains, right? Since they're afraid of the plague, why don't they clean up the streets? Why didn't they build a complete sewage system? Why don't they uplift the slums? They're all in the same city. Does this mean that this place will be fine when there's a plague over there? Well, with water sources, food, and people isolated, and them moving only in one direction, perhaps it really will be alright. But there are plagues that can be transmitted through the air. When I hold a high position, I must push for urban planning and clean up the environment. Even without the plague, just living in such a stinking city is still very annoying. Oh right, I've been summoned tonight by His Majesty. I thought that since I was born on Earth, I, who received an education of all men being equal, would be neither humble nor arrogant and appear rather calm. But in fact, I remain very nervous and excited, unconsciously bending my waist and bowing my head. Of course, I know that in terms of dignity, I'm equal to the king. This is the charm of power. Even though this entire page is filled with daily activities, the emperor has still managed to make me laugh. He was also someone with a goal. Indeed, even for someone born in the modern world, they will still become apprehensive and sycophantic when faced with someone of high status, a person who can influence their fates. Klein smiled, his mood much more relaxed. He turned to the second page and continued reading. November 11th. About to advance to sequence 4 to become a demigod. After this, as long as I don't lose control, then my life's natural order will experience a qualitative change. I would no longer be a short-lived creature. Of course, different sequences of different pathways will be in different states. I face 2 choices. One is alchemist of the savant pathway, and the other is mysticologist of the mystery prior pathway. Eventually, I chose not to change pathways since the hidden sage is a very dangerous existence. However, I ultimately suspect that he isn't a real deity. Perhaps, he is of a slightly lower level. After becoming an alchemist, I will be able to inject soul into the items I create and give them life. This is the feeling of being a creator. It will definitely be excellent. It's also the reason why I continued choosing this Beyonder pathway. After obtaining this sequence's Beyonder characteristic, I should be able to complete more of my concepts. There will come a day when the saying, "It's not that we aren't working hard, it's just that the cheat has a Gundam." It will be a Gundam in the truest meaning of the word. The only problem is that the corresponding ritual of alchemist needs to extract all the life force of a particular region, desertification of the land, and the drying of lakes. Why is this not much different from a cult's sacrificial ritual? I've always felt that the potion sequence system has too many dark and crazy parts to it. Occasionally, it would be so evil that it can make one despair. The Emperor also feels the same way. Seeing this, Klein couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes he also felt that the background color of this world was grayish-black and crazy. Things like the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, the laws of pathway convergence, and interchangeability of close sequences, all bring about change that leads to tragedy. Alchemist is a very interesting sequence. Alchemical life sounds forbidden, and is a domain very close to that of deities. I wonder if the Emperor made any Gundams before he was assassinated. Probably not. Klein's thoughts drifted away for a moment. He was rather curious about the ritual of becoming a demigod-like high-sequence Beyonder. Unfortunately, Roselle didn't record much of it. After all, it was a diary, not a notebook. Sequence 4 Mysticologist of the Mystery Prior Pathway sounds good too. Klein turned over the second diary page and displayed the third page in front of him. April 23rd. This bunch of aristocrats really are a mess. I even thought that Ma'am Karen had seduced me for sex because she had taken a fancy for my inner self. But who knew that her husband, the Earl of Champagne, was peeping in the opposite room? He was even thrilled and even fucking wanted to fuck me. You're reading on all novel full thanks. I'm sorry, but I just can't accept it, so I had to kick him out of the room. Compared to their family, I'm just a pure child. Klein was momentarily speechless. He felt that the private life of Emperor Roselle was really filled with excitement, and that many of the Intis aristocracy were also sufficiently eccentric. If some aristocrat tries to seek novelty and finds a curly-haired baboon, some kind of disease might even be born. Klein sighed and looked down. April 25th. To cultivate my character and hone my mind, I went fishing at Swan Lake. I hope that one day I can go fishing at sea for a mermaid. Sigh, I've been quite depraved recently. I have to invigorate my spirit and invent more things. I can't leave any gaps. Since I transmigrated to this world, I will brand this era with my name. Emperor, it's better if you had fallen into depravity. Klein's mouth twitched without any intention of making comment. Then, he calmly looked at the last diary entry on the last page. April 26th. Zeratul came visiting. I deliberately asked him what a miracle was. He asked me in return about what I thought it was. What I think it is. There is only one miracle in my heart, and that is the wonders of civilization. For example, the great Twilight Hall of the Fasak Empire, the former residence of the giant king, Ormur. Zeratul finally gave a direct answer. He said, "What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead." Chapter 463. Answering his own questions. A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead? Klein suddenly remembered what had happened to him. The head injury of a man who shot himself in the head miraculously healing. A Beyonder who, having died from having his heart crushed, crawled out of his grave in the middle of the night. Are these considered miracles of being resurrected from the dead? Is this the miracle the leader of the secret order, Zeratul, spoke of? And sequence 2 of the seer pathway is called a miracle invoker. At this moment, Klein felt like he had grasped something important, but he was unable to piece together all the clues to form the truth he wanted. As I had guessed before, there are other factors at work for my choice of having seer as my beginning sequence. My greatest support is the mysterious space above the gray fog, which happens to eliminate all interference and provide seers the most coveted environment. My characteristic of resurrection also seems to have come from the gray fog as well. When I came to Backlund, the events in which Nimblewright Master Rosigo was involved in were naturally drawn to me, which is consistent with the convergence of beyonder characteristics of the same pathway. The higher quality it is, the stronger the attraction as the effects appear intermittently. The sudden change in the Antigonus family notebook style of passing key information to me, related to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, via the misfortune cloth puppet, might also be a result of such elements. Combined with the other miscellaneous phenomena, does it mean that this mysterious space has a very close relationship with the seer beyonder pathway? That this is a grade 0 sealed artifact of the corresponding sequence? Or perhaps it's a divine kingdom left behind by a sequence 0 of the same pathway. There's also the possibility of it being the so-called uniqueness of the seer pathway. Klein moved his gaze away from Roselle's diary, his anticipation for advancing to a high sequence beyonder increasing. He wondered what he would discover in the hidden area after he completed the staircase of light. Perhaps the reason for my transmigration and the way home will be found there. He suppressed his excitement and allowed Roselle's diary pages to disappear from his hands. At the same time, he became increasingly wary of the leader of the secret order, Zeratul. He was a powerful existence that had long since become a miracle invoker from the seer pathway many years ago. There might be times and matters that have his fingerprints hidden all over them. Although all of these thoughts were churning in his mind, Klein acted as though nothing had happened as he calmly said, "You can begin your transactions." Furs immediately turned to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side of the table, and she said with expectation, "I have received a reply. My teacher has a pair of mirror dragon eyes. The price is £1,000. Upon saying that, Furs felt a little uneasy. This was because Dorian Gray Abraham's reserve price was £800, which was already at a premium above the usual £500 to £600. And on that foundation, she had added another £200. After attending so many tarot gatherings and all kinds of beyonder circles, I finally understand one thing. Just like Emperor Roselle said, money isn't omnipotent, but nothing can be done without money. Although I've already received the fixed payment for my new book, and have savings reaching £350, there's still the Spirit Eater stomach pouch awaiting me. There's also all kinds of expenses needed for sequence 7, 6, 5, and even 4. The meaning before Mr. Fool's secret hint is that I should be able to be freed from the curse of the full moon once I become a high sequence beyonder. Even if I can find some of them through teacher, I can't fully rely on him and the Abraham family. In this regard, saving up money on my own isn't enough, and efforts must be made to make money. The price of £1,000 is really expensive. If Miss Justice wishes to bargain, I'll later tell her that teacher agreed to lower the price by £100 after repeated negotiations. As Furs waited for the reply, she consoled herself. £1,000? Audrey never expected to receive news for the psychiatrist's potion ingredients so quickly, so she subconsciously asked in a confirming tone. Without waiting for a reply from Furs, she happily added, "Okay, deal." Although she still owed Viscount Glaint a final installment, and still owed the Fool's Adorer £2,000, she would officially be declared an adult at the New Year's ball. Not only would her control over her wealth be greater than ever before, but she would also receive many valuable gifts, such as the one promised by her father, Earl Hall, a few days earlier. He had promised to give his dear daughter a further £50,000 in Backlund Bank shares, and more than £2,000 in cash. Hence, £1,000 wasn't a number that she was bothered with. Audrey had originally asked Mr. Fool to extend the payment period of the £2,000 to February or March in order, on the one hand, to pay off her debt to Viscount Glaint, and to save up money as discreetly as possible without arousing suspicion. On the other hand, she had to set aside an additional budget for the ingredients of the psychiatrist's potion. Now was the time to use the budget. At most, I'll have to tighten my belt like how I did for the past few months. After March, there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey thought, not troubled at all. She agreed? She agreed. Furs was both happy and confused. Furs asked Mr. Fool to bear witness to the transaction and arrange for Miss Justice to make the payment first before she delivered the Beyonder ingredient on Wednesday. As Furs decided to head for Pritz Harbor immediately upon receiving the cash, without wasting any time in the middle, she looked at the three gentlemen, the sun, the hanged man, and the world. Does anyone have any information on the Spirit Eater stomach pouch? After calming down, she discovered that with her experience in the acting method, she could digest the excess Beyonder characteristic much faster than she had expected. 1 week was almost equivalent to 2 weeks of the past. In about 10 days, she would be able to completely digest and resolve the problem. When she gathers the ingredients and advances to Trickmaster, she felt that she would be able to perfectly pass the first test given by her teacher, Dorian. She would gain more attention and would no longer be a mere student who was taken in out of gratitude. Derek nodded and said, I was just about to tell you that during this exploration, we obtained some Spirit Eater stomach pouches. I can exchange it at low prices after I return to the City of Silver. That's under the premise that I'm no longer under surveillance. Okay, but it seems that you have no use for gold pounds. Furs asked directly. After the operation to save Little Sun, she had a preliminary understanding of the City of Silver. Without waiting for the Sun to say a word, Alger interjected. You can hand me the corresponding cash or gold coins to me. 300 pounds is a very reasonable price. I will provide the Solar High Priest potion formula to the Sun. Mr. Hanged Man, you have the formula to Solar High Priest? Derek asked in pleasant surprise. During his previous patrols and his recent explorations, he had increasingly felt that the powers of the Sun pathway were perfect for dealing with the dark. Although the giant pathway sequence 6 Dawn Paladin could already create the light of dawn, in the realm of the holy and light, it's still inferior to a light suppliant. The Hanged Man nodded slightly and said, That's right. He had found the Solar High Priest potion formula in a treasury of the Rorstad archipelago, but it was only recently that he had found an opportunity to provide sufficient justification and have the sufficient conditions to have the right to read it once. The reason that he gave was that people suspected to be priests of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun had appeared on the Sonia Sea, and since he was temporarily unable to return to the Intis Republic, he could only search for the potion ingredients corresponding to Solar High Priest. Moreover, the hatred for the Eternal Blazing Sun could turn mere rumors into the basis for action by the Church of the Lord of Storms. Derek was delighted at first, but he soon said with some awkwardness, the value of the Sequence 7 potion formula is higher than a Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. I don't have the gold pounds all of you were talking about. You can repay it with ingredients of the same value. The Hanged Man gave a terse response. But I don't know what I can get from you. First, you should make a list of the common monsters found around the City of Silver and their corresponding ingredients. I'll then choose from that list. No problem. After this exploration is over, I will do it as quickly as possible. Derek was visibly relieved. By the side, Klein wanted to face bomb, but in the end, he didn't manipulate the world to break the deal. It was because he also wanted to know what kind of monsters and ingredients were common around the City of Silver. As Audrey secretly sighed, the Hanged Man looked around and raised his request. I need a pair of dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. I'll pay the necessary compensation. He only mentioned the dragon-eyed sea condor eyes. In other words, Mr. Hanged Man has clues regarding the blue shadow falcon's crystalline feathers. He really does have many channels and resources. Audrey, who had seen the potion formula for Windblessed, thought with some enlightenment. After the transactions came to an end, they began to freely exchange information about their areas, and the end of the tarot gathering quickly approached. During the process, the world inquired for clues about mermaids, and obtained an answer similar to the one he had received from Sharon. When everything was over, Klein, who had been watching quietly, thought it necessary to warn Miss Justice and Miss Magician. A terrifying object that is suspected to be a Grade 0 sealed artifact has appeared around Prince Edisac. It might even involve 0-08, which would definitely not be a simple matter. Furthermore, The last time a similar situation occurred, Tinjin City had faced the threat of an evil god's spawn, and it had almost disappeared from the map. Hence, now there's also a hidden danger in Backland. Klein thought for a few seconds, making the world say in a hoarse voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have recently received some information that a major event is brewing in Backland. This will bring about a great deal of unrest, and may lead to a tragedy." "What's the major event?" Audrey asked with concern. Unknowingly, her brow had begun to slightly furrow. "I don't know." The world shook his head calmly. Where would the element of unrest and the possible tragedy come from? Furs asked nervously. From the previous gatherings, she had confirmed that Mr. World's sources were trustworthy. The world acted stumped as he shook his head and said, "There's contradictory information, making it impossible for me to give a definite answer." Upon saying this, he looked up and earnestly cast his gaze towards the figure within the gray fog at the end of the mottled table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, your adorer in Backland must have detected something, right?" Everyone's eyes immediately focused towards the end of the long bronze table, with everyone feeling different feelings: curiosity, worry, anticipation, and tenseness. With the attention on him, Klein leaned back and said in a casual tone, "Edisac Augustus." Chapter 464. Consultation Prince Edisac Augustus? What connection does he have with the danger that might lead to tragedy? Moreover, this matter seems to have received the attention of Mr. Fool. Audrey instantly matched the name with a face, giving rise to great worry and doubt in her. In her opinion, things that caught the attention of Mr. Fool were either very dangerous, extremely secretive, or had far-reaching importance, and were by no means simple. For example, the true creator had attempted to descend upon Backland with the help of Lenivus, and the harsh conditions of East Borough's factory district, Emperor Roselle's Dark Emperor card, or the death of the Duke Negan, and the Twilight Hermit Order. Taking these examples into account, Audrey had good reason to believe that, if not handled well, or given too little attention, the major event involving Prince Edisac would inevitably lead to a very, very terrible storm. Yes, Prince Edisac hasn't bothered me for quite some time, and I was only relieved by that, and didn't think too much about it. Now, it does seem a little problematic. At the previous ball, he still warmly kept me back to discuss some boring topics, trying his hand at pompous bad humor. But just 2 or 3 days after that, he turned rather cold, and had even deliberately avoided me. I have to find a chance to ask Father about him, but I can't show too much curiosity, or else it might be very possible that he would agree to the royal family's marriage request. Audrey recalled some details, and she suddenly felt her shoulders sink from the weight. She had never liked Prince Edisac, including his 2 elder brothers, and she had no intention of becoming a princess consort. As for the reason, it was very simple. The followers of the Evernight goddess couldn't accept that the Augustus family had believed in the Lord of Storms for generations, which meant their arrogance, pomposity, contempt, and eccentricity against women had penetrated deep into their bones. It was hard to change them, which was the one thing Audrey couldn't tolerate the most. When she thought of the strict, ancient, and extremely conservative environment she would find herself in after becoming a princess consort, Audrey felt that she would surely go crazy and flee, disregarding everything else. So she wasn't moved at all by the rather solicitous flattery of the princes. She was even very repulsed. Edisac Augustus. The last name implies that he's a member of the royal family. I vaguely remember that he's a prince. What dangerous matter is he going to do? I have no way of coming into contact with him. Right. I can ask Miss Audrey and Viscount Glaint for help, but I have to think of a reason ahead of time to prevent any suspicion from them. Furs frowned slightly as she interpreted Mr. Fool's words. Alger was very interested in the matter, but he didn't dare to ask Mr. Fool, who was obviously just providing a hint. He could only ponder to himself for 2 seconds before saying to Justice, the magician, and the world, "The atmosphere over the sea isn't calm either. It might have a connection with Backland, just like those machines." His words were completely baseless. He simply wanted to exaggerate the degree of the danger, and let the 3 tarot club members in Backland investigate it diligently. I have to say that Mr. Hanged Man has acted in concert so well. Klein, who was watching from the sidelines, gave up on the idea of having the world say something similar. He only mentioned Prince Edisac, but not the lady with the sapphire ring, who was suspected of having a grade 0 sealed artifact. He didn't even mention the possibility that the matter Prince Edisac might be involved in had to do with 0-08, and in Sangwil, because he didn't know the circumstances of the top sealed artifact that could even destroy a country. All he could rely on were minute clues to make guesses that he wasn't completely sure of. He was afraid that if he directly told the key points to Justice and Miss Magician, their investigations would be detected by the target the moment they honed in on the target. This was also why Klein didn't try to find an opportunity to inform the machinery hive mind. Based on his guesses about sealed artifact 0-08, he suspected that if he left Minsk Street and rode a horse carriage to the Lever Cathedral or the Steam Cathedral, he would encounter an unexpected and absolutely unstoppable attack, such as the eruption of a sealed artifact hidden underground, or a fatal strike of a high-sequence beyonder. Only the screening of the gray fog allowed Klein to not worry about such problems. To a certain extent, he could inform Justice and the Magician about this through a more gentle, more roundabout, and more veiled manner. In addition, Klein had other plans. It was to leave Backland by bowing out the stage as a side character among side characters, and changing his appearance without anyone noticing. He would then secretly return and contact the machinery hive mind in a manner beyond the grade 0 sealed artifact senses. Let's hope this will succeed. I hope there's a chance of finding in Sangwil. Yes, the premise is that he is indeed involved in this matter. Wait a minute. While Mr. Azik was after in Sangwil, he had a conflict with MI9. He became secretly wanted, and MI9 has always been considered to be a pro-royal faction in the military. A series of coincidences revolving Prince Edisac is rather similar to the features displayed by sealed artifact 0-08 in the past. This seems to indirectly confirm in Sangwil's existence. Klein closed his eyes, and the bright boots and pale hand flashed back to him. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving upward. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall meet next week. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring blankly at her reflection. There were good news and bad news for her at this tarot gathering. The good news was that she was about to receive one of the psychiatrist's potion's main ingredients. Although she was no longer the ignorant girl who had bought some basic general knowledge from the Hanged Man for £1,000 and knew the approximate price of a lot of beyonder ingredients, she didn't mind paying a premium for the eyes of a mirror dragon. After Duke Negan's assassination, she gained the desire and motivation to raise her sequence to receive the corresponding combat strength. For this, she didn't want to wait any longer, and was willing to pay a price. As long as the ingredients appeared, she would immediately accept the offer as long as the price wasn't too outrageous, in case something unexpected happened. It's like a precious piece of jewelry that many noble ladies have set their eyes on. It's also like the purebred houses with unique bloodlines that men like. The corresponding premium is inevitable and unavoidable. At times, it's not impossible to have the price double or triple. Besides, with Furs busying herself in the process of contacting her teacher, she definitely shouldn't be left wasting her time while taking on risks. Yes, she also doesn't know that I'm Justice. Audrey thought indifferently. As for the bad news, it was no doubt related to the matter of Prince Edisac. It left her concerned and worried. Fortunately, Mr. World received the news, and Mr. Fool had provided a warning. Otherwise, who knows how things would have turned out. Audrey, with such excellent conditions, you could certainly solve this problem. Come on. The girl drew the sign of the crimson moon against the reflection in the mirror, and tried hard to be optimistic. Then, she restrained her emotions and headed out to the piano room, preparing to participate in her scheduled piano lesson, as if nothing had happened. This was because Earl Hall and his wife, as well as Hibbert Hall, wouldn't be home until dinner, and she had no one to ask for information now. She could only tell herself to be calm, to be composed, and to be patient. Before the tutor arrived, Audrey casually played the piano, using the beautiful melody to cleanse her mind and soul. When she finished playing, she noticed that Susie had opened the door at some point and was sitting beside her. She still had a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hanging around her neck. "Audrey, what problems did you encounter? The sound of your piano tells me that you're frustrated over something," Susie said suddenly. Audrey froze, not knowing how to reply. She suddenly felt that having a mind-reading dog at home wasn't necessarily a good thing. Within the campsite that had a lit bonfire, with his eyes closed, Derek Berg thought back quietly to what had happened at the tarot gathering and made sure that he hadn't forgotten the memories of his repeated experiences. After an unknown period of time, he opened his eyes, which were brimming with anticipation, and looked around. However, what entered into his eyes were Flames and his teammates, who were exactly the same as in his memories. At that moment, the cross-legged demon hunter Colin, who was leaning against a stone pillar, said, "We will set off after 50 rounds of lightning." At this moment, Derek was sure that everything that had happened before wasn't a dream or a hallucination. Chowood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. Klein went down to the first floor and sat in the activity room, feeling the warmth of the fireplace. He quietly rocked in the reclining chair without reading the newspapers, magazines, or even books. It was all so peaceful and silent until he heard the ringing of his doorbell. Klein, who was wearing a house shirt and cashmere vest, got up and walked towards the door. The visitor took him by surprise. He opened the door and chuckled. "Good afternoon, Emlyn. Aren't you supposed to be helping at the Harvest Church at this hour?" It was the handsome, somewhat effeminate, vampire Emlyn White, whose hair was combed back at an angle. The arrogant man's expression froze when he heard Klein's greeting. It took him a bit of effort to recover his composure. "I have something to consult with you, Detective Sherlock Moriarty." Emlyn enunciated one word at a time. After inviting him into the activity room, Klein returned to his reclining chair and asked with a smile, "What is it?" "The fee for a consultation is £1, but the consultation cannot exceed an hour." Emlyn White didn't pay attention to his words, and he said while deep in thought, "A big shot wants me to do something. Although that matter can help me solve my problem indirectly, it also contains a great amount of risk. I don't have any friends, and I'm afraid my parents will be worried. And you're a very knowledgeable Beyonder detective. What do you suggest? Reject or accept? Solve your problem? Clearing the psychological cue?" Klein said thoughtfully. "I can't give you any advice with just the word something." Emlyn White fell silent for a few seconds before he clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "It has something to do with that fool." "Ha!" Klein almost lifted his hand to his ear. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."